My husband died and left me a locked phone. Not the company he built from nothing. Not the mansion on the hill with the 12-car driveway. Not the collection of vintage cars he polished like they were museum pieces. Just a phone. By the time Randall Cole finished reading Grant's will, my hands were frozen around the armrest of the leather chair. I heard his voice say my name, Marion Whitfield, and for a second I thought there had to be more. Something, anything. But there was. The company went to my eldest son, Travis, 40% and operational control of Whitfield development, along with the major projects. The board was already half in his pocket anyway, so it wasn't a shock, just a formal coronation. The mansion went to my daughter, Brooke, to better suit her lifestyle and public image, the will said, as if I had outlived both lifestyle and image. She smiled politely, like she was accepting a brand collaboration, not the house where I raised 3 children and learned how to live with a man who loved concrete more than sleep. The cars and the Cabo property went to my youngest, Logan, to encourage independence and responsibility. Which was funny, because Logan had never been responsible for anything more complicated than a bar tab. And me. A personal item, my private cell phone currently stored in my office safe, to be delivered intact and not tampered with by any other party. That was it. Silence hit the room like someone had cut the oxygen. I felt all 3 of my children turn toward me at once. Travis smirked first. He had Grant's jawline and none of his restraint. "A phone," he said, laughing under his breath. 45 years and you get a phone." Brooke pressed her lips together in a sympathetic little pout that didn't reach her eyes. Logan gave an awkward half-laugh, like he knew he shouldn't, but he also wanted his siblings to think he was on their side. "Maybe Dad thought you'd get lonely," Brooke said lightly. "You know, something to keep you busy." They weren't monsters in that moment. Monsters imply teeth and claws, something honest. What they were felt worse. Polished, successful, carefully groomed adults, amused by how pathetic their own mother looked sitting at the far end of a very long table. I remember staring at the surface of that table, at my reflection trapped under the glass and polished wood. Gray hair pulled into a bun that had started the day neat and was now collapsing. Wrinkles I hadn't noticed before. Hands that had once held blueprints and traced lines and now just folded around nothing. A phone. That afternoon, I left the skyscraper with a tiny brass key in my palm and my children walking ahead of me, talking numbers and expansion like they had just won a prize. They didn't look back to see if I was following. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I didn't care about things. I had always said that. Things don't matter, people do. But a week later, when the appraisers came through the mansion and the interior designer, Vanessa Clark, started talking about brightening this space and modernizing that wing, something inside me began to split. I lived in the guest room, suddenly a guest in my own house, while Brooke discussed which rooms would become her dressing room, her office, her yoga studio. 30 days, the will said. I could stay in the mansion for 30 days. Then I had to leave. The phone waited behind a painting in Grant's office, locked in the safe like a secret he didn't trust anyone to hold. When I opened the door of the safe and saw it lying there alone, I felt stupid for expecting anything else. No envelope. No note. No hidden letter for the wife who had followed him from cheap rented apartments to skyscraper boardrooms. Just the phone. It was heavier than it looked. A little outdated, a little scuffed around the edges. When I pressed the power button and the screen lit up, my breath caught. The background was our wedding photo. Me at 25 in a simple white dress, cheeks full and eyes bright. Grant young and impossibly handsome, the kind of man who believed he could bend the world into the shape he wanted. The phone buzzed once, then prompted. Enter passcode. My first guess was our anniversary. Wrong. Then his birthday. Wrong. Then mine. Wrong. After 5 attempts, a red warning appeared. Too many incorrect attempts. Try again in 30 minutes. 30 minutes felt manageable. So I sat in his leather chair, hands clasped in my lap, listening to the echo of appraisers. Voices down the hall and the casual way they put prices on lamps and paintings and rugs like they were talking about fruit at a market. 30 minutes turned into hours the next day. Hours turned into days. By the time I had to leave the mansion, the phone and I were like enemies locked in a cold war. I took it with me to the tiny one-bedroom apartment Brooke's assistant found on short notice. That's what she called it in the email, as if arranging my exile deserved corporate language. The apartment smelled like old smoke and something fried into the walls. The carpet was stained, the fridge hummed too loud, and the only view from the small window was a brick wall and an overflowing dumpster. In the mansion, I had space and light and a terrace with a view of the city. Here, I had a mattress that dipped in the middle and a bathroom so cramped I could wash my hands while sitting on the edge of the tub. The phone sat on the crate I used as a nightstand. Every time I looked at it, I remembered Travis's laugh, Brooke's pity, Logan's uncomfortable smirk. 45 years and you get a phone. I tried everything. All their birthdays. The day Grant signed his first big contract. The date we moved into the mansion. The street number of the first office we rented. Each wrong guess pushed the timer higher. Try again in 30 minutes. Try again in 1 hour. Try again in 4 hours. Eventually it was. Try again in 24 hours. The longer the lockout, the more the phone became something else. Not just an object, but a verdict. Proof that, even at the end, Grant had trusted numbers and codes more than he trusted me. Days blurred. The kids sent money at first. Polite deposits into my account labeled monthly support, like I was a charitable case instead of their mother. Then the amounts got smaller. Then they stopped altogether. The calls never came. I stopped expecting them after a while. I learned the sounds of the building instead. Doors slamming, arguments 3 floors down, the neighbor's TV bleeding through the thin walls. I measured my days in cheap instant coffee and the ticking countdown on that stupid phone. Sometimes I would wake up at 3 in the morning, reach for it, and stare at the blank screen, seeing my reflection in the black glass. Who are you now, Mari? A woman with a locked phone. That, who? By the time my 70th birthday approached, I had given up on the idea that the passcode was something sentimental. Maybe it was random numbers. Maybe Grant had changed it and forgotten. Maybe he hadn't expected to die at all. I went to bed that night alone. No cake, no candles, no children, just the glow of the street lamp sneaking through the blinds and the soft hum of the fridge trying its best not to die. The phone lay beside me, dark and silent. 11:58 p.m. I watched the red digits on the cheap alarm clock crawl forward. I didn't know why I stayed awake. Habit, maybe, or spite, or the stubborn hope that something in my life might still surprise me. 11:59 p.m. My chest felt tight. 70. I had made it to 70. I had survived marriage, childbirth, miscarriages, recession, late-night arguments about money and risk and why Grant had to go back to the office just one more time. And for what? 12:00 a.m. The clock changed. In the same breath, the phone lit up. Not because I touched it. I hadn't laid a finger on it. The screen flashed, bright in the darkness, and a message appeared I had never seen before. Passcode accepted. My heart thudded so hard I felt it in my throat. The lock screen slid away on its own, and before I could process what was happening, the phone began to ring. The sound was wrong, not the default tone. A custom one. A recording of a piano piece Grant used to play when we were young and broke, and he still had time to touch the keys. I stared at the caller ID. Grant. My dead husband's name glowed on the screen. I answered with a shaking thumb. Hello. For a moment there was only static, a faint hiss like breathing through a wall. Then a voice slipped through, familiar and impossible. Happy birthday, my love. I stopped breathing. It was him, Grant Whitfield. Older, tired, a little raspier than the last time I heard him in the hospital, but undeniably him. You finally made it to 70, he said. Good, now the real game begins. Game. The word sliced through the fog in my brain. What kind of game starts after your husband dies and leaves you with nothing but humiliation and a locked phone? I tried to speak, but my mouth was dry. Grant, what is this? He didn't answer me directly. Typical. Even dead, he was directing the conversation. There are things you don't know, he continued. About me, about the company, about our children, about you, Mari, especially about you. I felt my fingers go numb around the phone. This isn't a joke, he said, as if he could hear the disbelief twisting my thoughts. And you're not crazy. Everything that happened, it was necessary. You needed to see them, and you needed to see yourself. Tears burned my eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were from fear or anger. Maybe both. I left you more than they think, he said softly. More than they could ever imagine. But before you can claim any of it, you have to understand how you got here. Static crackled again. The room seemed to tilt. Listen carefully, Mari, he said, because what comes next will change everything. For you, for them, for everything I built. My hand slipped. The phone slid from my grip and hit the mattress, screen blazing up at me, his name still glowing as if he were sitting in the room. I stared at it, chest heaving, every nerve in my body vibrating. Grant was dead. The phone had unlocked itself. And whatever game he was talking about had already started. I picked the phone back up with trembling fingers and pressed it against my chest, squeezing my eyes shut. If I wanted to survive whatever this was, I needed to understand it. And to understand how I ended up on a sagging mattress in a cheap apartment, holding my dead husband's voice in my hand at midnight on my 70th birthday. I had to go back 3 months. 3 months to the exact day of Grant Whitfield's funeral. His last morning started like any other. He was already half-dressed when I woke up. I heard the closet door slide, the soft rustle of his suit jacket, the clink of cufflinks in that little ceramic dish I made in a pottery class 30 years ago. When I opened my eyes, he was standing in front of the mirror, knotting his tie with the same quick, practiced movements I'd watched for decades. The only difference was the gray. It had crept into his hair and along his jawline so slowly that I mostly noticed it in photographs, not in real time. You're going in early, I asked, my voice scratchy with sleep. He glanced at me in the mirror. City permit meeting. If I don't scare them, they'll stall me for another month. There was a light in his eyes I recognized too well, the thrill of the fight. He loved a problem he could beat with a pen stroke and a well-placed threat. You slept 3 hours, I said. Maybe. He shrugged, reaching for his watch. Buildings don't wait. I sat up, pressing my hand absent-mindedly against my chest. My heart felt heavier than usual that morning, like the air in the room had thickened overnight. Grant, you're not 30 anymore. He smiled at that, the quick sideways grin that used to make me forgive anything. I'm close enough. I watched him for a moment. The lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight stiffness in his shoulders when he rolled them back. I remembered the doctor's warnings after his last checkup. Take it easy, cut back the hours, listen to your body. When was the last time you took a full day off? I asked. He slipped his watch on. When was the last time we needed me not to work? That was his language. Need, not want. Want was for people who didn't sign paychecks. Eat something before you go, I said. At least toast. He leaned over, kissed my forehead, and for a second his hand rested on the mattress to steady himself. Just 1 second. It was small enough that if you weren't watching him the way I always did, you could have missed it. Julia ordered breakfast to the office, he said. She'll yell if I don't touch it. Julia Price, his secretary, had been half assistant, half mother for years. Sometimes I wondered if he listened to her more than he listened to me. He straightened up, grabbed his jacket, and headed toward the bedroom door. He paused just long enough to throw one last line over his shoulder. Don't worry so much, Mari. I've got at least 10 more years of fighting left in me. He was dead by 3 in the afternoon. I wasn't there. That part is the hardest to live with. Julia told me later what happened, her voice shaking through the phone, the sounds of chaos still echoing faintly behind her words. He was in the middle of a conference call, she said. One of the contractors was pushing back about cost overruns. You know how he gets when someone tells him no. Yes, I knew. His temper sharpened when money was on the line. His voice got low and hard. He stopped blinking as much. He grabbed for the desk, Julia said. Just grabbed, his face went white. I thought he was about to yell. Then he just went down. I imagined the scene. Blueprints spread across the desk, contracts open on the screen, his chair still slightly rocking behind him as he hit the floor. I called 911, she continued. We did CPR until the paramedics came. They tried, Marion, they really tried. But he was gone before they ever lifted him onto the stretcher. He died in the middle of his empire, surrounded by steel and glass and paper instead of people who loved him. And I was sitting at our kitchen table, circling a grocery list I never finished, trying to decide whether to bake his favorite lemon cake that weekend. I wasn't holding his hand. I wasn't there to say goodbye. That guilt settled in my chest heavier than any grief. Grief is about losing someone. Guilt is about failing them. The funeral home was cold. Not just the air conditioning, but the kind of cold that seeps in when a room is crowded with people who dressed in black because their calendars told them to. They had filled the place with flowers, towering arrangements of lilies and roses, and something fragrant I couldn't name. The smell was thick and sweet and cloying, and I knew with a painful, ridiculous certainty that Grant would have hated it. Too much, he would have said. Feels like we're wasting money to impress people who don't matter. His casket was open at the front of the room, under a flood of soft, flattering light. Someone had done their best with him, smoothed his hair, fixed his tie, softened the angles of his face. He looked like a stranger pretending to be my husband. The first row of chairs was reserved for family, which apparently meant my children and their significance, not me. Travis sat in the center like a stand-in king, his phone resting face down on his leg, screen still lighting up every few seconds with messages. I watched him slip out twice before the service even started, phone pressed to his ear as he walked into the hallway, voice low and urgent. He had already found the company's lawyers. Brooke was flawless, of course. Black designer dress, perfect heels, diamonds small enough to be tasteful but large enough to catch the light. She held a folded packet of documents in her lap, and when she thought no one was looking, she scanned them, lips moving slightly as she calculated something in her head. Logan sat on the other side, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. From behind, it looked like raw grief. But every time someone came over to squeeze his shoulder or whisper, "I'm so sorry," he'd lift his head just enough to make sure they were watching when he wiped his eyes. I chose the second row, not by design. I walked toward the front and there was nowhere for me to sit. Their row was full of them and their partners. There was one empty seat pressed between Travis and his wife like a decoration, and I understood without a word that it wasn't meant for me. So I slid into the second row, hands folded in my lap, my view of my husband framed perfectly by the backs of my children's heads. People kept mistaking me for someone else. "I'm so sorry for your loss," a woman whispered, squeezing my arm. "Were you one of his early investors?" "I used to work in his first firm," a man said, shaking my hand quickly before moving on to Travis, to Brooke, to the real gravitational centers of the room. "He talked about you all the time." Did he, I wondered, and which you did he talk about? The version who kept his shirts ironed and made coffee at midnight? Or the version who once stayed up 3 nights in a row to help him rework a design the city rejected? Pastor Mark Reynolds stepped up to the front, adjusting his microphone with a practiced hand. His voice was smooth, the kind of tone that made people feel things on schedule. "We are here today to honor a generous man," he began. "A devoted husband, a loving father, a pillar of this community." My jaw tightened. He talked about charity gala appearances, about scholarships with the Whitfield name attached, about holiday donations that made for great photos in the paper. He didn't talk about the nights Grant slept in his office. He didn't talk about the deal that almost bankrupted us in the early years. He didn't talk about the way Grant's eyes lit up when he spread out a new set of blueprints on the kitchen table and asked, "Do you see it, Mari?" To Pastor Mark, to the crowd, Grant was an idea, a brand. Strong, steady, successful. To me, he was the man who once came home so tired he fell asleep standing up in the shower, forehead pressed to the tile. The man who forgot our anniversary 3 years in a row, but remembered the square footage of every building he ever touched. The man who loved me, I think, in the only language he trusted. Security, stability, a world made solid through concrete and steel. But on that stage, in that moment, he wasn't mine. He belonged to the story they wanted to hear. Grant cared deeply about his family, Pastor Mark said, gesturing subtly toward the front row. He worked tirelessly to provide for them, to build a legacy they could be proud of. I stared at the back of Travis's head. He was already leaning slightly toward the aisle, as if prepared to stand up and take a bow for the legacy part. The service rolled on in carefully timed waves. A hymn here, a reading there, polite tears, dabbing at eyes with monogrammed handkerchiefs. I sat through all of it in a strange kind of numbness, my mind stuck on the same ugly loop. You weren't there when he died. You should have been there. You should have known. Someone squeezed into the seat beside me for 2 minutes. An old neighbor, I think, whispered something about how strong I was being, then moved away again to get closer to Travis and Brooke. The space beside me stayed empty after that. 45 years of marriage, and I sat alone in the second row at his funeral. Halfway through the reception line, the door at the back of the room opened with a soft click that somehow cut through the murmur of conversation. I looked up and saw Randy, Cole step inside. He wasn't dressed like the others. No glossy black suit, no overly shiny shoes. His was darker, more muted, the kind of fabric that said old money, old experience, old secrets. He moved with the calm of someone who was used to rooms stopping for him, even if they didn't realize they were doing it. He didn't come to me. He walked straight down the side aisle, nodded politely to Pastor Mark, then leaned down between 2 chairs in the front row until his mouth was level with Travis's ear. I watched my eldest son's shoulders go rigid. Randy murmured something I couldn't hear. Travis turned his head, just enough that I could see his profile. For a brief second, genuine grief flickered there. The raw, lost expression of a boy who had just buried his father. Then, like someone flipping a switch, it was gone. His jaw tightened, his eyes sharpened, his lips pressed into a thin, calculating line. I had seen that expression before, on Grant's face in meeting rooms, when someone mentioned a distressed property or a failing competitor. Predator, that was the word that came to mind. Randy straightened, clapped a hand briefly on Travis's shoulder, and then slipped away to the back of the room, already dialing his phone as he walked. Brooke leaned toward Travis, whispering something fast. Logan looked from one to the other, trying to read which emotion he was supposed to copy. None of them looked at the casket. None of them looked at me. In that moment, sitting alone in the second row with my hands folded and my heart splitting in quiet, private ways, I understood something that hurt more than the sight of my husband's still face. I was losing a man I had built a life with. They were circling what he left behind. By the time the last hymn faded and people started checking their watches, it was clear. I wasn't just burying a husband. I was watching my children become vultures over an empire still warm in the ground. The reading of the will was 2 days later, in a room that felt more like a verdict chamber than a law office. Randy Cole's firm sat on the 22nd floor of a glass building downtown, all sharp angles and reflective surfaces. From the sidewalk, it looked like the kind of place where people went to move money they would never touch with their own hands. From inside, it felt worse. The elevator opened into a reception area that smelled faintly of lemon polish and expensive coffee. Floor to ceiling, windows offered a panoramic view of the city, like a reminder that power lived at this height. A young woman with perfect posture and a practiced neutral smile asked for my name, then directed me down a hallway lined with framed degrees and photos. In every picture, there was Randy, shaking hands with judges, posing beside politicians, smiling next to CEOs whose names I recognized from headlines. Grant appeared in 2 of them, both times standing just slightly behind Randy, as if aware, even then, who truly controlled the fine print of his success. The conference room was long and narrow, a glass wall on one side, a wall of dark wood on the other. A polished table stretched almost the full length of it, its surface so shiny I could see the reflection of the overhead lights. Leather chairs ringed the table, high-backed, imposing, designed to make ordinary people sit up straighter. My children were already seated when I walked in. Travis had taken the chair at the far head of the table, the one facing the city view. He sat like it belonged to him, jacket unbuttoned, tie perfect, one arm draped casually over the back of his chair. His phone lay on the table within reach, screen dark for once, but I could tell from the way his fingers tapped that he was itching to pick it up. Brooke sat to his right, tablet in front of her, stylus in hand. She wasn't scrolling social media. Brooke never wasted time like that. She was reviewing numbers, notes, something already related to post-funeral strategy, I was sure. Her dress looked simple until you saw the stitching, the fit, the small logo near the hem that whispered a price tag I didn't want to know. Logan took a seat halfway down the table, as if he couldn't decide whether he wanted to be near his siblings or a safe distance away. His leg bounced under the table, his fingers drummed an uneven rhythm, his tie was already slightly crooked. His grief, at least, looked more honest than theirs. My chair was near the opposite end, closest to the door. Not at the foot exactly, but far enough away that if I tried to speak, I'd have to raise my voice for them to hear me. "Marion," Randy said, standing as I entered. "Good to see you." "Good to see you. At my husband's will reading." I nodded, the polite automatic gesture of a woman trained not to make waves in rooms like this. "Thank you for having me." He gestured toward my chair. "Please sit." I did. The leather was cold against my back. Randy took his place near the center of the table, a thick file in front of him, his glasses folded neatly beside it. Behind him, on the wood-paneled wall, hung more diplomas and certificates that reminded everyone he was a man whose words carried weight. "We'll begin," he said, voice smooth and professional. No condolences, no softening, just business. "As you all know, this is the formal reading of the last will and testament of Grant Alexander Whitfield." Hearing his full name spoken in that tone made something in my chest tighten. Randy opened the file and began. The words flowed like a contract, that careful, lifeless rhythm of legal language. "Being of sound mind and body, hereby declare," supersedes all previous versions. It was the kind of writing I had watched Grant pore over for years, line by line, making sure every angle was protected. Then we moved past the preamble, and Randy's eyes lowered to the first section that actually mattered. "Regarding Whitfield Development and all controlling interests therein," he read, "I bequeath 40% ownership and full operational authority to my eldest son, Travis James Whitfield." I didn't have to look at Travis to know his expression. I could feel it, but I looked anyway. His lips curled into a smile that had nothing to do with sadness. It wasn't joy, either. It was satisfaction, confirmation, the expression of someone who had studied for a test he already knew he was going to ace. Along with all current projects, subsidiaries, and the authority to negotiate, restructure, or dissolve any existing contracts as necessary, Randy continued. Travis sat back a little, shoulders easing into the chair, like a crown had just been placed on his head. "Regarding the primary residence located at," Randy read the mansion's address, which sounded strangely clinical stripped of the word home. "I bequeath full ownership to my daughter, Brooke Elaine Whitfield, including all furnishings, fixtures, and attached structures." Brooke's stylus stilled for a beat. She didn't smile. She didn't gasp. She simply nodded once, eyes dropping to whatever document she already had open, fingers moving as she made a note. Planning, calculating, transforming a life into line items. "In addition," Randy went on, "I bequeath to my daughter 30% of remaining liquid assets and investments, to be held in trust and managed under existing guidelines until such time as she elects otherwise. Brooke's mouth tightened in a faint line of approval. Regarding my youngest son, Logan Dean Whitfield, Randy continued, turning a page. I bequeath 20% ownership in Whitfield Development, along with full rights to the following properties and assets. He listed them out. The Cabo property, several cars, smaller investments attached to Logan's name. With caveats and conditions, phrased in a way that made it sound like generosity disguised as a lesson. I looked at my youngest. For the first time that day, his shoulders dropped from their defensive hunch. Relief washed over his features. He wasn't cut out. He wasn't forgotten. He had a slice of the empire, too. He exhaled, lips forming a silent, "Okay," like he'd been holding his breath for days. As they absorbed their shares, I felt the room tilt, not physically, but emotionally. Power was rearranging itself, sliding down invisible pathways, setting into new shapes. I sat at the far end, hands clasped in my lap, heart pounding loud enough that I could feel it in the tips of my fingers. My name hadn't been spoken yet. I told myself not to care. I had food. I had clothes. I had lived a whole life without my name ever being attached to a building or a board seat. I didn't need numbers on a page to know I had been part of building all this. But when you sit in a room and hear the sum of a man's life parceled out like slices of cake, and you are the one who washed his shirts and woke up when he didn't come home on time, and you still haven't been mentioned, something in you starts to shake. Randy turned another page, his eyes scanning, his voice as steady as ever. And finally, he said, regarding personal property and remaining effects. My pulse thudded harder. I bequeath to my wife, Marion Elaine Whitfield. There it was, my full name, dropping into the air like a stone into deep water. My private cellular device currently stored in the wall safe located in my home office, along with all contents therein. This device is to be delivered to her intact and is not to be accessed, altered, or tampered with by any other party. Silence. Not the respectful silence that follows a meaningful bequest, a different kind. For a few long seconds, no one moved. The words hung there, absurd and weightless. Then Travis snorted. It broke out of him in a short, sharp laugh he barely tried to hide. A phone, he said, eyebrows rising. He leaned back and looked from Randy to me as if this were a dark joke everyone else was in on. 45 years and you get a phone. Heat flooded my face. Brooke's stylus slipped from her fingers and clattered softly against the tablet. That can't be it, she said, turning to Randy. There must be something else. Jewelry accounts, the Aspen place. Randy shook his head once, the motion small but definitive. Your father was very clear in his instructions. The phone is the sole item specifically and personally allocated to Mrs. Whitfield. Mrs. Whitfield, not Mari, not Marion, just another title. Logan's laugh came out strangled, half nerves, half disbelief. Maybe it's some kind of vintage thing, he said weakly. Collectors pay crazy money for old tech, right? Travis shot him a look that said, "Shut up, you're not helping." I stared at the polished table, at my reflection distorted by the sheen. A phone. My entire life reduced to a rectangle of plastic and glass. Brooke recovered first. Her voice softened, adopting that gentle tone she reserved for public sympathy and private irritation. Mom, I'm sure Dad had his reasons. Maybe there are messages, or memories. You know how sentimental he could be. Sentimental. The man who once redlined a contract at 3 a.m. because a decimal point was in the wrong place. Randy cleared his throat. There is one additional clause of relevance, he said. I lifted my eyes. In regard to residency, he read, I grant my wife, Marion Elaine Whitfield, the right to remain in our primary residence for a period not to exceed 30 days following my death. After that time, all decisions regarding the property, its use, sale, or renovation will fall under the sole authority of its inheritor, my daughter, Brooke Elaine Whitfield. Brooke straightened, as if someone had just adjusted a crown on her head. So, she said slowly, we'll need to move quickly. If we're going to get the house ready in time for the fundraiser in spring, the contractors will need a clear schedule. 30 days is tight, but doable. She looked at me like she was reviewing an outdated piece of furniture. We'll find you something comfortable, Mom. Smaller, easier to manage. It'll be better for you in the long run. Better for me. I felt something inside me hairline fracture. Not enough to shatter. Just enough to make a sound I could hear only inside my own chest. Better, I repeated, my voice thinner than I wanted it to be. Right, of course. Everything's always for my own good, isn't it? Travis smiled a little, that cold, humorless stretch of lips. Come on, Mom, let's be reasonable. Dad didn't cut you out. He just structured things the way he thought made sense. Reasonable. I had been reasonable when I put my degree away in a desk drawer to raise 3 children because we didn't have childcare. I had been reasonable when he mortgaged our first house to buy land for a project that might have failed. I had been reasonable every time I swallowed a sharp word so he could stay focused on bigger issues. The crack inside me widened. I heard my own voice change just a little. Reasonable, I said. What a lovely word for sit down and accept it. Brooke's expression tightened. Mom. No, it's fine, I said, even though it was. My hands were shaking against the edge of the table, so I folded them in my lap to hide it. Your father did what he always does. He took care of the business. He took care of the brand. And he left me with something to keep me occupied. I forced a small, brittle smile. 45 years and I get a phone. I suppose I should be grateful he didn't leave me the copier. Logan winced. Travis looked annoyed that I'd chosen this moment to grow a spine. If you're upset, Travis said, tone shifting into the condescending calm he used in board meetings, maybe ask yourself why, Mom. I blinked. What? He leaned forward, elbows on the table. Dad was a logical man. He believed in cause and effect. If he left you just a phone, maybe you should be asking what you did or didn't do to deserve anything else. The words landed like a slap. For a moment, the room blurred. I saw myself at 25, standing in a half-finished kitchen, paint on my hands, belly swollen with our first child. I saw myself at 40, balancing a checkbook at the dining table while Grant paced, talking to contractors, promising money we didn't yet have. I saw myself at 58, alone in a big empty house while he stayed at the office 3 nights in a row. What I did. What I didn't do. My life, apparently, did not qualify as an asset. Randy cleared his throat again, sensing maybe that this had gone far enough, or perhaps simply eager to move on to the next appointment in his schedule. He closed the file with quiet finality. That concludes the primary allocations, he said. Execution of these terms will begin immediately. There will, of course, be follow-up documentation for each of you to review and sign. He reached into a smaller drawer at his side and brought out a tiny brass key. It glinted under the recessed lighting, insignificant and suddenly enormous. Mrs. Whitfield, he said, standing and walking toward me. This is the key to the wall safe in your late husband's home office, as specified. I stood too, legs unsteady. My hand looked old as I held it out, thin skin, blue veins, faint tremor. He dropped the key into my palm. It felt heavier than it should have. Travis was already rising from his chair, turning to Brooke and Logan. We need to schedule a meeting with the board this week, he said, and get ahead of the press narrative before anything leaks. Randy, I'll need the updated corporate structure breakdown by Friday. Brooke tucked her tablet under her arm, adjusting her dress as she stood. I'll start talking to designers about the house, she said. If we time it right, we can use the renovation as a PR opportunity. Logan followed them out, asking a question about the Cabo property, his voice fading as the door swung shut behind them. I stayed where I was. The room felt suddenly huge without them, the table too long, the windows too bright. The city outside moved on, oblivious to the fact that a man's life had just been sliced and distributed, that a woman who had shared his bed for nearly half a century now stood holding a key that was supposed to make it all feel fair. I looked down at my hand. A tiny piece of metal. Grant's entire legacy for me, condensed into something that could be lost if I tripped on the curb. I closed my fingers around it, feeling the sharp edges press into my skin until it almost hurt. When I finally walked out of Randy Cole's office, my children were nowhere in sight. They had already moved on to the next phase: calls, plans, expansion, control. I walked alone down the hallway lined with other people's achievements, past the smiling photos and the diplomas and the framed dollar signs pretending to be Latin phrases. In my palm, the key grew warmer as my body heat seeped into it. It felt, in that moment, like I was carrying not a promise, but the weight of a failed life. I went to get the phone that same afternoon, still wearing the black dress from the funeral and heels that pinched my toes. It felt wrong to change, as if the moment I put on something comfortable, it would mean I accepted the new shape of my life. The mansion was quiet in that unnatural way big houses get when the main source of noise is gone. No phone calls echoing from the hallway, no footsteps rushing down the stairs, just the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of a car somewhere down the hill. Grant's office was at the back of the house, past the formal living room no one really used, and the hallway lined with framed magazine spreads about visionary builder Grant Whitfield. I had dusted those frames myself more times than I could count, running a cloth over his frozen smile, wondering when I had stopped existing as anything but his wife in the fine print. His office door was half closed, like he'd just stepped out to take a call. I pushed it open and stood there a moment, hand on the knob, caught between then and now. The room felt frozen in time. Blueprints lay unrolled across his desk, covered in his sharp, impatient handwriting. A half-empty coffee cup sat on a coaster, a ring of dried brown around the rim. The leather chair was slightly turned away from the desk, the way he left it when he stood up with one more thought in his head. The smell hit me hardest. Leather, tobacco from the cigars he claimed he only kept for clients. A faint trace of his cologne soaked into the upholstery. If I closed my eyes, I could almost imagine hearing him muttering over a zoning regulation or calling out, "Mari, do you remember what year we did that Riverside project?" I walked in slowly, my heels clicking on the hardwood. It felt like trespassing. The painting that hid the safe was a large abstract piece he bought at a charity auction, angry strokes of red and black that he said reminded him of risk and reward. I had always thought it looked like a bruise. I slipped my fingers behind the frame and felt for the hidden latch. The painting swung forward on its hinges with a soft creak, revealing the small steel door behind it. The key Randall had given me was warm from being in my hand. It slid into the lock with a little resistance, like the safe itself was reluctant to open after being sealed so tightly around his secrets. I turned it. The mechanism clicked, low and final. I pulled the door open. There it was. No stacks of cash, no velvet box with a note, no envelope labeled for Mari in his messy handwriting. Just an old phone. It lay on the small shelf alone, screen dark, edges slightly worn. It wasn't even one of the newest models. Grant could have upgraded a dozen times over. Instead, he held on to this one, his private line, the one he took into meetings he wouldn't talk about at dinner. I picked it up. The weight surprised me. Heavier than my own phone, dense in my hand, like it contained more than plastic and circuits. The back was smooth, the cold metal biting into my palm. The buttons along the sides were a little loose from years of being pressed. I turned it over and pressed the power button. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the screen blinked to life with a soft vibration. The first thing I saw was us. Our wedding photo filled the screen. Me at 25, in a simple white dress I'd sewn extra fabric onto because the original design felt too bare. My hair was pinned back with tiny pearl clips that my mother insisted on. My eyes were bright, full of unearned confidence. Grant stood beside me, dark hair untouched by gray, smile so wide it made his eyes crinkle at the corners. He was looking at me, not the camera, like he couldn't believe he'd managed to talk me into this, into him. I stared at that girl for a long time. I remembered her, She had plans, a portfolio full of designs, offers from 2 small firms downtown. She used to stay up late sketching buildings that would never exist, imagining skylines that had her name on them. Somewhere along the line, she traded blueprints for grocery lists, client meetings for parent-teacher conferences, site visits for waiting up until 2 in the morning with a pot of coffee for a man who always had just one more call. I lifted my eyes from the screen, scanning the office, the awards, the framed city plans, the bookshelf filled with thick, serious volumes about development and finance. Everything in this room screamed his name. Mine was nowhere. Then a prompt slid up from the bottom of the screen. Enter passcode. Of course. I exhaled slowly, the breath shuddering a little. All right, Grant, I muttered under my breath. Let's see what you thought was worth leaving me instead of literally anything else. My fingers moved automatically to the number pad. The first guess was obvious. Our anniversary. 0823. The phone buzzed softly. Passcode incorrect. I tried his birthday next. The day he came into the world, so determined to bend it. Nothing. My birthday, the kids' birthdays, the year we moved into the mansion, the date of his first big contract. Every time, the screen rejected me with the same calm message. Passcode incorrect. After 5 attempts, the font turned red. Too many incorrect ATTMPTS. Try again in 30 MINUTES. 30 minutes. I could handle 30 minutes. I set the phone gently on the desk and lowered myself into his leather chair. It creaked under my weight, familiar and foreign at the same time. I had stood beside this chair so many times, leaning over his shoulder to look at a drawing or to hand him coffee. I had never really sat in it for long. That was his throne. Outside the office, I heard footsteps and distant voices. Someone from the appraisal company, probably, talking to Brooke about the value of the antique credenza in the hallway. The world was already putting price tags on our life. I kept my eyes on the phone as the minutes crawled across the screen. When the timer ran down, I picked it up again. This time I tried combinations that made less sense. Our first apartment number. The last 4 digits of the landline we used to have, back when phones still hung on kitchen walls. The year of the big recession and the year he recovered. Each failure ratcheted something tighter inside me. After another series of attempts. Too many incorrect ATTMPTS. Try again in 60 MINUTES. The lockout periods began to stretch. 30 minutes, 62 hours, 4, 8, 16. It was like the phone was punishing me for not knowing the magic sequence to prove I deserved to see what was inside. At some point, my eyes blurred. I wasn't sure when the tears started, only that suddenly I couldn't see the numbers clearly. I set the phone down before I dropped it, pressed my palms into my eyes, and bent over, elbows on my knees. I had not cried at the hospital. I had not cried at the funeral. I had not cried in Randy Cole's office, while my children divided their father's life like spoils. But I cried then. In that leather chair, in that office that still smelled like him, with that stupid phone glowing just out of reach. The tears weren't just for Grant. They were for the girl in the wedding photo, the one who thought she'd be an architect, not an accessory. They were for the nights I stayed up with fevers and science projects and bills while he chased dreams in skyscrapers. They were for every time I'd told myself, "It's okay, this is just a phase," until I realized the phase was my entire life. I wiped my face on the back of my hand and forced myself upright. "Fine," I whispered to the empty room. "If you're going to make this a puzzle, I'll treat it like one." I spent the next few days living in that office. I searched everywhere for clues. I went through drawers full of pens and highlighters, old business cards, half-used legal pads. I checked the backs of picture frames, flipped through notebooks, opened boxes of archived files. I examined his cigar box, even though I hated the smell, looking for numbers scratched into the wood. Nothing. I checked the bottoms of his whiskey bottles in the small cabinet, as if he might have been poetic enough to carve a password into glass. He was. I looked through his contracts, his meeting notes, his travel itineraries. Nothing. While I hunted, life in the mansion shifted around me. Appraisers came and went, murmuring to each other in low voices about current market value and significant pieces. I saw Tom Avery, the appraiser, run his hand along the banister of the main staircase and quote a number that made my stomach turn. Vanessa Clark, the interior designer, swept through like a storm, nails perfectly lacquered, hair in a smooth ponytail, heels clicking confidently on the marble. "If we brighten these walls and update the lighting, this place could really breathe," she told Brooke, as if it had been holding its breath for the past 15 years. Movers started showing up to take measurements. I overheard one of them, Greg Howard, joking. Rich people even pack different, as he looked at the rows of dust-free shelves. From the cracked open door of the office, I watched Logan wheel a suitcase down the hall one afternoon, phone to his ear. "I know, man, I'm still coming," he said. "Yeah, Cabo's still on. Dad wouldn't want me to just sit around mourning, right?" He hesitated when he saw me, gave a half wave, half flinch, then looked away and kept going. In the middle of all that movement, the office was a still point, a strange little island where time had stopped the moment Grant's heart did. Every time the lockout period ended, I tried again. Anniversaries written different ways, dates broken into different patterns, the year we met, the year each child was born, reversed, doubled, combined with mine or his. Passcode incorrect. Too many incorrect ATTMPTS. Try again in 4 hours. Try again in 8 hours. Try again in 16 hours. I started to feel like the phone was judging me, not just for not knowing the code, but for thinking I had a right to it at all. One evening, near the end of the 30 days, I sat in his chair with the lights dimmed, watching the glow of the screen like it was a small, indifferent moon. The house around me was in transition, half packed, half stripped, hallways echoing as paintings came down and boxes filled up. Brooke had already scheduled the renovations. I'd overheard her on the phone in the kitchen, saying phrases like modern aesthetic and maximize resale impact, while she stood in the room where I used to make dinner for 5 people every night. Travis was rarely home, already living in conference calls and boardrooms, his grief filed neatly between press release and restructuring plan. Logan floated in and out, already mentally on a beach somewhere, telling himself he deserved it because Dad wanted us to enjoy life. I had one more day before I had to start packing my own things. The phone chimed softly. The latest lockout had ended. I picked it up again, fingers shaking, not from age this time, but from the dull, grinding panic of running out of chances. "What did you use, Grant?" I whispered. "What mattered so much to you that you put it here instead of on paper?" I stared at the keypad. For a moment, my mind went blank. Then I thought of something I hadn't tried yet, the date of his father's death. It had changed him that year, made him harder, sharper, made him push twice as hard, convinced time was coming for him, too. Maybe he'd use that as a reminder. I entered the numbers. The phone buzzed. Passcode incorrect. My stomach dropped. I tried one more sequence, some desperate combination of years and days that felt significant only because I wanted them to be. The screen froze for a beat. Then the message appeared, in stark, unforgiving letters. Too many incorrect ATTMPTS. Device will be locked for 30 days. 30 days. I stared at the words until they blurred. 30 days for the phone. 1 day for me. In less than 24 hours, I would no longer be allowed to live in the house where I'd spent most of my adult life. In less than 24 hours, the walls of this office would belong to Brooke's renovation plans, not to me, not even to the ghost of the man who had filled them with his work. The phone went dark in my hand, its small, stubborn heart going silent. I placed it gently on the desk, as if dropping it might shatter something I couldn't fix. Then I stood, knees protesting, and looked around the room one last time. The blueprints, the coffee cup with its dried ring, the indentation in the carpet where his chair wheels had worn a path. I wanted to take the whole room with me. I wanted to shrink it down and fit it in a box, safe and untouched. Instead, I took the phone. The next morning, the movers came for my life. Boxes were stacked neatly in the hallway outside my bedroom. My bedroom, though legally, temporarily, and emotionally that title was already moving to Brooke. I packed my clothes myself, folding them slower than necessary, as if dragging the process out would somehow stall time. Brooke moved through the house with a clipboard in hand, dressed in sleek black leggings and a loose blouse that whispered money with every swish. She checked off items as Tom Avery called out values, her face calm, efficient, detached. "Mom, we'll have your things sent over this afternoon," she said when she appeared in my doorway, leaning against the frame like she owned it. Because she did. "The apartment's all set. It's small but cozy, easier for you to manage." Behind her, Greg Howard supervised two men carrying out one of the armchairs from the sitting room. I watched them navigate the hallway I had once watched toddlers wobble down, and teenagers storm through, and a husband rush along with his tie half knotted. "Don't worry," Brooke added when I didn't answer right away. "Change is hard, I know, but this will be good for you." Good for me. I picked up the box at my feet and walked past her. By noon, my world had been reduced to what fit into the trunk and backseat of a mid-range sedan. A few boxes of clothes, some photos the appraisers deemed sentimental, not valuable, a couple of books, a lamp that no one fought me for, and the dead phone in my purse. I stood in the driveway one last time, the mansion rising up behind me, elegant and aloof. Sunlight glinted off the windows. From this distance, you couldn't see the flurry of activity inside, just the smooth, perfect face the house presented to the world. Brooke stood on the front steps, arms crossed, overseeing a delivery truck pulling up with new materials. Travis wasn't there. Logan had already left for Cabo, sending a quick text that said, "Love you, Mom. Let's talk when things calm down." Things never calm down when you're not the one in control of the storm. I opened the car door and slid into the passenger seat. The cushion felt unfamiliar. The interior smelled like some kind of chemical, new car spray, not like home. As the driver pulled away, I looked down at my purse. Inside, buried between my wallet and a pack of tissues, was the phone. Locked for 30 days. Just like me. The apartment was smaller than our old walk-in closet. The landlord called it a cozy one-bedroom. It was not. It was a single room with a cracked window, a stained carpet, and a bathroom so tiny I could wash my hands while sitting on the toilet. The fridge hummed like an old truck in the corner, and every few minutes it made a choking sound that made me think it might give up before I did. The walls were the color of old teeth, beige that had once been white, maybe, before time and other people's lives stained it. A thin strip of kitchen counter sagged along one wall, bowed slightly in the middle as if it had tried to hold too much. The window looked out onto a narrow alley where a dumpster sat permanently open, surrounded by a halo of trash and cigarette butts. When the door closed behind me that first day, the silence felt heavier than all the boxes in my arms. A thin mattress lay on a metal frame against the wall, still wrapped in crinkling plastic. No headboard. No bedside table, just the mattress, the fridge, the window, and a single overhead light that buzzed if I stared at it too long. I set the boxes down and lowered myself onto the mattress. It dipped toward the middle like it was already tired of holding people up. In my purse, the phone pressed against my hip, a small, solid reminder. 30 days, the screen had said when I left the mansion. Device will be locked for 30 days. 30 days before I could try again. I took it out and set it on the crate the landlord had optimistically called a nightstand, though it was really just an upside-down plastic bin. The phone looked expensive and out of place against the scratched surface. I sat there a long time, still in my funeral dress, hands folded in my lap, feeling old and discarded. In the mansion, if a light flickered, I called someone. If a pipe rattled, someone came to fix it. Here, when the fridge sputtered, I held my breath, because if it died, I had no one to call and nothing to fill it with anyway. The routine built itself out of necessity. The first time I walked to the little grocery store 2 blocks away, I almost turned back. The fluorescent lights, the narrow aisles, the way the cashier barely looked up when I walked in, it all felt like a different planet. I had spent so many years ordering things in bulk, planning dinners for 5, keeping a pantry stocked for surprise guests and late-night teenage hunger. Now I picked up the cheapest loaf of bread I could find, a small block of generic cheese, a carton of eggs, nothing with a brand I recognized from our old life. Those belonged to another version of me. At home, I counted slices. Half a sandwich for lunch, half for dinner, an egg every other day, cheese shaved thin enough to see light through it. I took my pills and split them in half too. Heart, blood pressure, the ones the doctor had emphasized with a serious look. These are non-negotiable, Marion. Everything is negotiable when your bank account shrinks to numbers you used to spend on catering. At night, I stood in front of the mirror nailed crooked over the bathroom sink. My face looked longer under the harsh light. New hollows appeared near my collarbone, where soft flesh used to be. My arms, once strong from carrying groceries and toddlers and boxes of holiday decorations, seemed thinner every week. The phone stayed on the crate beside the bed, dark and silent, like a witness I hadn't called to testify yet. At first, the kids sent money. Automatically, I think, whatever their accountants had set up. Transfer from Whitfield Holdings popped up on my banking app, and for a moment I could pretend it was support, not an obligation. Enough to cover rent, utilities, and food that didn't feel like an apology. Then the amount shrank. Adjusting for cash flow, Travis texted once, as if I'd asked. Then it shrank again. Then, 1 month, it didn't show up at all. I called Travis first. His office number directed me to a receptionist who transferred me to his assistant, who put me on hold for 7 minutes with soft piano music. "Mr. Whitfield is in a meeting," the assistant finally said, her voice polished and professional. "You can send him an email or I can take a message." "Tell him it's his mother," I said. I need to speak to him." "I'll let him know you called," she replied. "He's very busy with restructuring at the moment. Things are complicated." She said, complicated the way people say terminal. Brooke didn't even have a gatekeeper. Her voicemail answered in her own bright, perfectly controlled voice. "Hey, it's Brooke. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." She did not get back to me. I left one message about the money. I left a second one saying to forget the money. I just wanted to hear her voice. By the third, I hung up without saying anything, listening to the beep and the emptiness that followed. Logan texted, "Mom, I love you, but I need some space. This has been a lot. We're all dealing with Dad's death in our own way. I'll reach out when things settle down." Things never settle down for people like them. They just find new storms to stand in the center of. The loneliness settled over the apartment like another layer of dust. I started measuring time in lockouts. The phone's 30-day punishment became my calendar. I drew a little grid on a piece of paper and taped it to the fridge. Every morning I crossed off a square. Day 1, day 2, day 12, day 18. The phone sat there, indifferent. On day 30, I woke up before dawn. It wasn't like I had anywhere to be, but my body insisted. I made weak coffee, sat on the mattress, and waited for the digital clock on the stove to flip to the time I'd last seen that cruel message. "Device will be locked for 30 days. When the numbers finally matched, my hands started to shake. "All right," I whispered, picking up the phone. "Round 2. This time, I tried to be strategic. I wrote numbers on the back of an envelope, arranging them in patterns. The year he got his first big contract. The date of the city council victory he talked about for weeks. The day we moved into the mansion, down to the month and year. I picked the ones that felt most grand. The milestones he counted, not the ones I did. I entered the first sequence. Passcode incorrect. The second. Passcode incorrect. The third. Too many incorrect ATTMPTS. Try again in 15 MINUTES. 15 minutes was bearable. I set the phone down, stared at the greasy alley through the window, and pretended not to see the rat scurry beneath the dumpster. Another attempt, another failure. The lockout stretched 30 minutes, an hour, 4 hours. With each rejection, something in me shrank. The phone wasn't just refusing a code. It felt like it was refusing me, as if even a dead man's secrets had more right to exist than I did. On my 67th birthday, I woke to the sound of the fridge making that choking noise again. For a moment, disoriented, I reached out, expecting to feel Grant's side of the bed. My hand met cold air. I lay there and waited for my phone to ring, not the one in the safe, the normal one, the one any of my children could have called. They didn't. No, happy birthday, Mom. No, we should do dinner sometime this week. Nothing. The only sound in the apartment was the buzz of the light and the far-off slam of someone else's door. I made toast from the heels of the bread and cut one of my remaining pills into thirds instead of halves. Just this once, I told myself, just to make them last. The other phone, the one that really mattered now, was still under lockout. Next attempt available, 11:42 p.m. I stared at that little line of text more times than I wanted to admit that day. As the hours ticked by, I tried to distract myself. I washed the same 3 plates, rearranged the contents of my one cupboard, sat on the mattress and stared at a water stain on the ceiling shaped vaguely like a continent. When the time finally came, I sat up straighter, wiped my hands on my jeans like I was about to take a test. Happy birthday to me, I muttered and picked up the phone. New strategy, new set of numbers. I tried the year of our engagement combined with the hotel room number we spent our honeymoon in. I tried the street address of his first office. I tried the date he bought his first plot of land, the one he liked to call the beginning of everything. Passcode incorrect. Too many incorrect ATTMPTS. Try again in 24 hours. The words blurred. I put the phone down so carefully it felt like handling a live grenade. I went to bed that night feeling less like a person and more like an error message. Days folded into each other. Sometimes the lockout was a few hours, sometimes longer. I lost track of the exact intervals. All I knew was that the more I tried, the more the phone punished me. I stopped writing down my guesses. The envelope filled with numbers had started to look like a list of my own failures. One evening, after yet another try again in 12 hours, I set the phone face down and left it that way for nearly 2 days. The apartment felt quieter without its faint occasional buzz, but also emptier, like I'd exiled my last connection to a life that used to feel real. I told myself to let it go. I told myself it was just a phone, that whatever was on, it couldn't possibly matter more than rent or food or the way my joints ached when the weather turned cold. But grief and curiosity share a root system. They both grow in the dark, spiraling around each other until you can't tell which is which. On a gray afternoon, with rain tapping weakly against the window and the alley below shining with oily puddles, I picked the phone back up. The lockout had expired. Enter passcode glowed on the screen, patient and unbothered, as if it hadn't been torturing me in increments. This time, I didn't make a list. I didn't think about contracts or permits or any of the landmarks of Grant's professional life. I thought about us. Not the version everyone knew. Not Mr. Whitfield and his wife at charity galas. The 2 kids standing in front of a courthouse in August heat, my cheap bouquet already wilting, his shirt collar too tight. Me at 25, insisting on paying for my own shoes because I'm not starting this marriage in debt to you, and him laughing like that was the most charming thing he'd ever heard. Our wedding date, August 23rd, 8:23. My age that day, 25. He used to tease me about it. You realize I'm marrying you at your peak, he'd say. It's all downhill from here, Mari. What if, I whispered to the empty room, for once you made it about me? Before I could talk myself out of it, I let my fingers move. 082325. The numbers appeared in a row, 4 dots and 2 digits, sitting there like small, fragile promises. My thumb hovered over the enter button. Part of me wanted to back out, to cancel, to save this attempt for something I could rationalize better. But instinct, or exhaustion, or something older than both, pushed me forward. I pressed. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the little spinning circle appeared, turning and turning, like the phone was thinking, weighing, deciding whether I deserved anything at all. I held my breath. My pulse pounded in my ears. I braced for the familiar slap of rejection. Instead, the message changed. Passcode accepted. My lungs forgot how to work. The lock screen slid away, smooth and unhurried, like this had never been a struggle at all. The home screen appeared. No flurry of apps, no clutter. Just a plain background, our wedding photo again, and 3 icons in the center, spaced neatly like parts of a map. A folder labeled for Marion. The calendar app, with one date marked by a tiny red dot. The voice recorder, showing a single file name I couldn't yet read because my vision had gone swimming. My hand shook so badly, I had to set the phone down on the mattress to keep from dropping it. For a long moment, I just stared. Not at the phone exactly, but at what it represented. I had been living as if my entire life had been boiled down to a locked screen and an error message. Now, suddenly, that small, stubborn device had opened. The apartment was still cramped. The walls were still stained. The fridge still groaned like it was dying twice a day. But on the mattress in front of me lay a phone that held something my children didn't know about. Something Grant had meant only for me. Shock and hope collided in my chest, so hard it almost hurt. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, realizing only then that I'd started crying again. This time, the tears were different. Less like mourning, more like someone loosening a knot that had been pulled too tight for too long. I picked up the phone, my fingers still trembling, and tapped the folder labeled for Marion. The 3 icons sat in the middle of the screen, like they were waiting for me to choose who I wanted to be next. For Marion. Calendar. Voice recorder. My thumb hovered over all 3 in turn. Calendar felt like a trap. Voice recorder felt like a punch I wasn't ready to take yet, so I tapped the folder first. The screen opened to a list. Dozens of files, each with bland, forgettable names that sounded like nothing and meant everything. WDCA 16 SD-COM deed, PDF. PNW Housing LLC Port Deed Final, PDF. NVA Log Unit Lease Bundle, PDF. It looked like the inside of Grant's brain. Acronyms, abbreviations, organization layered over obsession. I opened the first one at random. A digital document filled the screen. The font was familiar, the clean, official kind I'd seen on contracts for years whenever he shoved them across a table for me to take a quick look. Only this time, it was my name, over and over. Marion Elaine Whitfield, a married woman, sole owner of the property located at. I blinked and read it again. Commercial property, San Diego, 4-story mixed-use building, retail on the ground floor, offices above. Appraised value, $12,400,000. My name was on every line that mattered, not joint, not spousal, mine. For a second, I thought it had to be wrong. A draft, an unsigned version, some hypothetical structure he'd never actually executed. My gaze flew to the bottom. Signatures. The notary stamp. The date, 6 years ago. 6 years I'd spent worrying about grocery budgets and college loan payments, while my name quietly owned a building in another state. I backed out of the file with a shaking thumb and opened the next. Apartment complex in Portland, 112 units. A photograph attached showed a neat brick structure with clean landscaping and a community sign out front. Owner of record, Marion Elaine Whitfield. Estimated value, $18,100,000. I did the math without meaning to. 12 plus 18, 30. Another file. Warehousing and distribution unit outside Las Vegas. Long, low, ugly concrete buildings that would have made Grant proud for their efficiency, not their beauty. Multiple long-term tenants. Owner of record, again me. Value, $7,800,000. 38. I opened file after file. A strip mall in Phoenix, a small medical office complex in Colorado, 2 lots on the edge of a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood in Chicago. Every time, my name. Every time, his signatures. Every time, dates going back years. There were PDFs of bank statements, too. Accounts I had never heard of, all under my social security number, with balances that made my breath catch. Spreadsheets tracking rental income, expenses, net gains. It wasn't random, it was a system. By the time I stopped, my rough mental tally hovered around $42 million in assets. And that was me lowballing every estimate, too stunned to trust my own math. I set the phone down on my lap. For a second, the apartment around me came back into focus. The stained walls, the humming fridge, the view of the dumpster and the graffiti, my own knees pressed together under jeans that were looser than they had been a few months ago. I had nearly been evicted from a place that smelled like old grease, while buildings with my name on the deeds threw off rent checks every month. How, I whispered, why? The questions just hung there. The phone had no intention of answering them in that folder. I went back to the home screen and tapped the calendar next. The app opened to a blank grid, weeks and weeks of nothing. No meetings, no reminders, no appointments. Except for one. October 18th. A tiny red dot sat on that square. I tapped it. One event appeared. No time, no location, just a single word in the notes section. Wait. Lowercase, no explanation, no instructions, just that. I stared at the date, October 18th, my 70th birthday. Right now, I was 67. 67 and eating stale bread in a room the size of my old laundry area. He wanted me to wait 3 years. For what? What kind of man hides an empire in his wife's name, and then tells her, from beyond the grave, to sit tight like she's in a waiting room? A familiar anger stirred in my chest, sharper than grief and older than this apartment. It pushed my thumb to the third icon. Voice recorder. The app opened to a single file. No playlist, no archives, just one entry. Marion Final, it read. Length, 43:17. Recorded, 2 weeks before he died. My mouth went dry. I hesitated for a heartbeat, finger hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to shut the whole thing off, throw it in the back of a drawer, and pretend I hadn't seen any of it. $42 million in assets under my name. A mysterious date 3 years in the future labeled wait. None of it made sense, and I was so tired of things not making sense. But I needed to hear his voice, even if I hated what it said. I tapped play. Static, then the soft, unmistakable sound of him clearing his throat. Okay, Grant's voice said. If you're hearing this, Mari, it means I'm either very sick or already gone. And knowing you, you've already cursed me out at least twice for whatever you found on this phone before pressing play. Despite myself, a humorless sound escaped my throat. He wasn't wrong. His tone wasn't the booming, commanding one he used in meetings. It was lower, rougher, like the voice he used late at night when it was just us in the kitchen and the rest of the world was asleep. I'm not going to sugarcoat this, he continued. What I did to you was cruel, I know that. Leaving you with nothing in the will but a locked phone, letting the kids show you who they really are, that wasn't an accident. That was me. I signed my name under every paragraph that made it possible. My fingers tightened around the phone. I can hear you in my head right now, he said. Grant, why would you do that? Why humiliate me like that? Why stand by and let them treat me like I'm disposable? He exhaled, the sound crackling softly through the speaker. Because I needed the performance, he said. I needed you to see them without me standing between you and their worst instincts. And I needed them to show you exactly who they've become when they think there's no consequence. My eyes burned. I blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall yet. When we were young, he went on, you saw me before anyone else did. Before the buildings, before the magazine covers, before the boardrooms. You saw the kid who sketched skylines on napkins and got turned down by every bank in the city. And I saw you, the girl who could outdraw half the architecture students I knew, the woman who argued with me about load-bearing walls on our second date. There was a faint smile in his voice, a softness that cut like a knife. I asked you to marry me, and I told myself I'd give you the world, he said. What I actually did was give you my version of it, which meant dragging you into 18-hour days, 3 a.m. phone calls, and a house that felt more like a lobby than a home. I told myself it was for us, for the kids, for our future. And maybe some of that was true. But somewhere along the way, I started building a life where you existed in the margins. His words settled over me like dust. I watched you shrink, he admitted. Not all at once, piece by piece. One project you turned down to handle a school crisis. One promotion you didn't chase because I was on the verge of a breakthrough. One more dinner you ate alone because I had to take a client out. He paused. When he spoke again, his tone was heavier. And then we raised 3 kids in that environment. Kids who saw me work like a machine and assumed money was the same thing as love. Kids who saw you hold everything together and assumed that was just your job. I thought of Travis at the head of the table in Randy's office, of Brooke with her renovation plans, of Logan dragging his suitcase past me, already half drunk on the idea of Cabo. I failed them, Grant said quietly. As a father, I taught them to fight, but not what to fight for. I taught them to win, but I didn't teach them what happens when you win at the cost of your soul. The apartment felt smaller with his voice in it, like he was sitting on the edge of the mattress, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. So I did the only thing I know how to do, he said. I started planning. I could almost see him then, hunched over his desk in that office, drawing arrows between boxes, creating structures on paper to fix problems he couldn't fix with an apology. Every file in that folder you just opened is real, he said. Every deed, every contract, every account. I moved those assets over slowly, quietly, legally into your name, not to hide money from the kids or from the government, to protect it from you. I frowned. From me, I whispered as if he could hear me. You are generous to a fault, Marion, he said, as if responding. If I'd told you about San Diego, about Portland, about Vegas, you would have insisted we do something nice for the kids with it. Pay off their mortgages, fund their startups, cushion every mistake. You would have turned your own parachute into confetti and thrown it off a balcony for them. My throat tightened. He wasn't entirely wrong, and that irritated me more than if he'd been completely off base. I wanted you to have something that was only yours, he said. Not ours, not theirs, yours. Something that didn't depend on whether the company rose or fell. Something that wasn't tangled up in their expectations. He let that sit for a moment. So, yes, he continued. I left you a phone and let you be humiliated in that office. I let Randy read out the will in a way that made it sound like you were an afterthought. I let the kids believe you were powerless. Anger flared in my chest, sharp and hot. And while they were laughing, he said, you were walking out of there with the key to a parallel empire that had been in your name for years. 42 million. I could almost hear the number unspoken between us. The documents are real, he said firmly. The money is yours, not theirs, not mine anymore, yours. I closed my eyes. I know what you're thinking, he added. If it was mine, why didn't you tell me sooner? Why make me go through the move, the cheap apartment, the hunger, the shame? The word landed heavy. Because you needed to see yourself without me, he said, his voice softer now. For almost 5 decades, you've been Grant, wife. The kid's mom. The one who stays behind, holds it together, makes it all easier for everybody else. You forgot what it feels like to stand on your own. I forgot to make sure you never did. Something inside me twisted. So I designed a kind of hell, he said. Not to punish you, to wake you up. Silence stretched for a few seconds. The only sound was a faint hiss of static, and beneath it, my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. I knew the kids would show their true colors if they thought you had nothing, he continued. I knew Travis would treat you like a liability. I knew Brooke would treat you like a scheduling problem. I knew Logan would run to the nearest party instead of standing next to you. Each sentence hit like a small, precise blow. "I needed you to see that, Mari," he said. "Not the softened version, the real thing, because when I'm gone, you don't owe them blind loyalty anymore. Love, maybe. A chance at redemption if they earn it, but not your life." He cleared his throat again. "As for the rest," he said, "there are reasons for the timing. Legal reasons, tax reasons, corporate time bombs I've set that you don't need to understand yet. Just know this, on your 70th birthday, certain structures go into effect. Things transfer. Walls go up around what's yours, and some walls come down around what they think is theirs." My gaze flicked to the calendar icon again, to that single word. "Wait." "This phone will reveal more on your 70th birthday," he told me. "Automated messages, scheduled calls, things I can't explain in one sitting without putting you to sleep." A faint, tired attempt at humor. "Until then, I need you to hold on," he said quietly. "I know you're probably sitting in some awful little place right now, wondering how it came to this. I hate that I put you there. I hate that I won't be there to drag you out myself. But I believe in you more than I believe in any building I ever put up." My chest ached. "You were brilliant before you ever met me," he said. "You were strong before you ever took my name. I need you to remember that woman. I need you to feel her in your bones again. Because when all of this comes to light, you're going to have more power than you ever wanted, and if you still think of yourself as just the wife, you'll give it away." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had gone almost rough. "You are not alone in this," he said. "I've made sure of that. There are people who know parts of the plan. One in particular will be there when you need him most. You'll find his number in this phone when the time is right. You can trust him." Later, I would learn his name, Samuel Walker. For now, it was just a promise floating in the dark. "What comes next will change everything," Grant said. "For you, for them, for the company, I can't control how they respond. I can't fix every mistake I made as a father, but I can finally do right by you." He drew in one last breath, audible through the speaker. "I love you, Marion," he said simply. "More than the buildings, more than the deals. I'm sorry it took me this long to prove it in a way that wasn't just another contract. Don't waste this. Don't shrink to make it easier for them. Stand up. Take what's yours. And whatever you do, don't feel guilty for surviving better than they do." The recording clicked off. The screen returned to its paused state, the little play triangle waiting at the bottom. I sat in the dark, the only light in the apartment coming from the phone in my hands. 42 million in properties. A date 3 years ahead circled by a dead man's plans. A promise that more was coming. My emotions fought with each other, crashing around inside my chest. Fury that he had put me through hunger and humiliation on purpose. Gratitude that he had thought of me at all, in a way that no one else ever had. I hit play again. I listened to all 43 minutes a second time, catching small details I'd missed the first. The softness when he said my name, the hard edge when he admitted his failures, the steady certainty when he said, "The money is yours, and you are not alone." When the message ended again, I didn't move. The fridge hummed. A car backfired somewhere outside. Water dripped in the bathroom sink in an uneven rhythm. I sat there on the thin mattress, the phone warm against my palms, and felt the world as I knew it tilt on its axis. His last words echoed in my mind, layering over each other like a new kind of foundation. "You are not alone. What comes next will change everything." I woke up the next morning with a hangover from a voice recording. 43 minutes of Grant talking to me from the grave had rearranged my entire world, but nothing in the apartment had moved. The walls were still stained. The fridge still hummed. The window still framed the same filthy alley and overflowing dumpster. Only I had changed. I sat on the edge of the mattress, the phone in my hands, and tried to fit the pieces together. On one side, peeling paint, a half-empty loaf of discount bread on the counter, overdue utility bills, and a landlord who knocked like he wanted to break the door down. On the other, a commercial building in San Diego, an apartment complex in Portland, a warehouse in Vegas, and more, all with my name on the deeds. $42 million, give or take, stacked quietly in my favor. I decided that morning not to tell the kids. Not yet. Grant had asked me to wait until my 70th birthday. Not politely suggested. Not offered it as a gentle guideline. He built the word into schedules and structures and legal booby traps I didn't fully understand. So I waited. From the outside, nothing about my life looked different. I was still the older woman carrying grocery bags with off-brand labels, still the tenant who paid in cash whenever she could, still the lady whose clothes hung a little looser every month. Inside, I walked around the city like an invisible millionaire. I saw a for lease sign on a vacant storefront and found myself mentally comparing square footage and rental yields. I passed a construction site and read the permits tacked to the fence, automatically scanning for developer names and zoning restrictions. It was muscle memory. The part of me that used to dream in floor plans was waking up. No one else saw it. On the bus, I was just another tired face staring at the floor. In the cramped grocery store, I was the woman counting coins at the register. On the sidewalk, I was the person people sidestepped without thinking. They didn't know that somewhere in San Diego, tenants were writing checks to a company with my name on it. That somewhere in Portland, families were going to sleep in apartments owned by a married woman, sole owner of record. The irony might have been funny if my rent hadn't been due. The money from Travis stopped completely the month after I unlocked the phone. No warning, no explanation, just nothing. When I checked my bank app and saw the empty space where the transfer usually appeared, my stomach dropped. I refreshed the screen 3 times, as if I could will the numbers into existence. They didn't come. 2 days later, Carl Jenkins knocked. He was a stocky man with a permanent frown carved into his face and a gut that pushed against his shirt buttons. He had the air of someone who'd spent years being told other people's problems and deciding not to care. He didn't bother with pleasantries. He never did. "Rent's late," he said, standing in the doorway like he was expecting me to bolt. "I know," I said. "I'm working on it. I just need a little time." "You've had time," he replied. "You were late last month, and the month before. I let it slide 'cause you seemed quiet, not like some of the other headaches I've got in this building. But I run a business, not a charity." I swallowed. "I've got money coming." "From where?" He looked pointedly past me into the apartment, taking in the bare counters, the sagging mattress, the lack of anything resembling income. I thought of San Diego, Portland, Vegas, all the places that were on paper mine. None of them were here in this room in a form I could hand to him. I need a couple of weeks," I said, adding how small my voice sounded. "I'll get it together." He sighed, the sound heavy and impatient. "You've got 2 weeks," he said. "Exactly. If I don't have the full amount by then, plus the late fees, I start eviction paperwork, and that moves faster than you think." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and held it out. "This is your formal notice. Consider yourself warned." The word formal felt obscene in that apartment. After he left, I sat on the mattress with the paper in one hand and the phone in the other. 42 million in assets, and I couldn't keep a landlord from tapping a warning to my door. Grant's voice played on a loop in my head. "I need you to hold on. This phone will reveal more on your 70th birthday. Don't waste this, don't shrink." "Easy for you to say," I muttered. "You're not the one who has to explain late rent to Carl." I scrolled through the documents in the For Marion folder again, looking for something I might have missed, a line that said, "Here is how you pay your bills in the meantime," or, "By the way, there's a debit card taped under the mattress." Nothing. The bank statements showed balances, but I had no checkbooks, no account numbers beyond the last 4 digits, no cards. If I walked into a branch and tried to explain, "My dead husband put these in my name but never told me how to access them," they'd probably call security. The idea of quietly waiting 3 years while my life fell apart suddenly felt less like liberation and more like a sick joke. So I did the thing I had been avoiding since the money first started shrinking. I decided to ask my eldest son for help, One last time. The bus ride to Travis's office was longer than it needed to be, 2 transfers and too many stops. I could have tried to hail a cab, but the idea of handing over money for 20 minutes of illusion, that I belonged in that world again, made me feel sick. I sat near the back, clutching my purse, watching the city slide by. Glass towers, crisp coffee shops with people hunched over laptops, families pushing strollers past planters that cost more than my monthly rent. By the time I got off near his building, my legs felt unsteady. Part age, part nerves. Travis worked in the same glass and steel tower where Grant had signed so many deals. I used to visit occasionally, bringing coffee or a forgotten folder, nodding at the reception staff like I belonged because technically, I did. I was the wife, the invisible partner. Now, walking through the revolving door, I felt like a trespasser. The lobby was all polished stone and glass, high ceilings, and echoing footsteps. A wall of windows flooded the space with light, reflecting off the metal security barriers near the elevators. Everyone carried badges. Everyone moved with purpose. I walked up to the reception desk. The woman behind it looked young enough to be my granddaughter. With a sleek ponytail and perfect makeup, her name tag read, Haley. "Good afternoon," she said, with a professional brightness that had been trained into her. "How can I help you?" "I'm here to see Travis Whitfield," I said. "I'm his mother." Her smile tightened by a millimeter. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but he'll see me," I said, hearing the thin edge of hope in my own voice. "Could you just let him know I'm here?" "I'm sorry, ma'am," Haley said, already sliding her eyes back to her screen. "Mr. Whitfield's schedule is full today. We don't send anyone up without an appointment." "I don't need long," I insisted. "Just a few minutes, it's important." She looked up again, this time really looking at me. I watched her take in the worn shoes, the cheap purse, the lines on my face that no serum had softened. "Leave your name and number," she said finally, picking up a pen. "If he wants to meet, his assistant can reach out to you." "He's my son," I said, the words scraping raw on the way out. "I used to bring him lunch to this building when he forgot to eat. I know he's busy, but if you just call upstairs and tell him I'm in the lobby." Her expression softened around the edges, but not enough to move her. "Ma'am, I'm really sorry. I could lose my job if I start bypassing protocol. Please have a seat. I'll send a message to his assistant." That was the best I was going to get. I sat. The lobby chairs were modern and low, designed for people in tailored clothes, not for women whose knees made noises when they stood up. I chose one in the corner, where I could see the elevator bank and the reception desk. Minutes stretched, then an hour, then 2. People came and went, flashing badges, greeting Haley by name, trailing expensive cologne and quiet confidence. No one looked twice at the older woman sitting with her hands folded over her purse, eyes fixed on the elevator doors like they might open onto salvation. By the 3rd hour, my back ached and my stomach had begun to cramp. I hadn't eaten anything that morning, afraid of aggravating the nausea that stress always brought with it. A security guard passed by once, giving me a curious look, but he didn't stop. Haley gave me a small, apologetic shrug from behind the desk. I wondered if this was what being a stray dog felt like, hanging around the edges of a place where the smells were good and the people were busy, hoping someone would decide you were worth feeding. Finally, near late afternoon, the elevator doors slid open and Travis stepped out. He wore a dark suit that fit him perfectly, the kind with subtle stitching that only people in his world noticed. His tie was straight. His hair was immaculate. He looked like a sharper, colder version of his father. He saw me almost immediately. His jaw clenched for a second before he smoothed his face into something neutral. "Mom," he said, walking over, "you should have called." "I did," I said quietly. "Your assistant said you were busy." "Well, I am," he replied, glancing at his watch as if to prove it. "What are you doing here?" I felt suddenly aware of the distance between us, not just physical, but financial, emotional, everything. The polished lobby made my clothes look cheaper, my hands look older, my need look bigger. "I need help," I said. No use dressing it up. The money you were sending, it stopped. The landlord gave me 2 weeks to get caught up on rent, or he's going to evict me. He sighed, a sound halfway between annoyance and exhaustion. Mom, we talked about this. Things are tight right now. The company is dealing with a lot after Dad. I'm not asking for a lifetime, I interrupted, my voice cracking. Just this once. I don't have anywhere else to go. His eyes hardened. That's not true. You have Social Security. You can get a part-time job. Plenty of people your age keep working. At what? I asked, incredulous. I'm nearly 70, Travis. So, he shot back, there are cleaning services, housekeeping. You've kept a house your whole life. Turn it into income. The suggestion landed like an insult. I had spent decades running a home that functioned as a staging ground for a self-made empire, hosting dinners, managing schedules, keeping everything moving so he and the kids could chase their ambitions. Now my eldest son, who grew up in that carefully managed world, was telling me to go scrub strangers' toilets to make rent. I gave up my career so your father could build his, I said, hearing the steel edge creep into my voice. I raised 3 children, one of whom is standing in front of me telling me to get a job cleaning houses like I'm a burden he wants to outsource. He glanced around, checking to see if anyone was listening. Keep your voice down, he muttered. This isn't about the past, Mom. It's about reality. Dad had a reason for structuring the will the way he did. Yes, I said bitterly, to humiliate me. Travis shook his head. You're choosing to see it that way. Maybe he didn't leave you money because he knew you'd mismanage it. You were never good with numbers. My vision blurred for a second. I was good enough to stretch his early paychecks into rent and food, I shot back. Good enough to keep track of 3 school schedules and a mortgage when he was sleeping at the office. He shrugged, unbothered. And look where you are now, he said. In a crappy apartment, late on rent, asking your kids to bail you out. Maybe Dad anticipated this and decided not to enable it. The cruelty was quiet, almost reasonable in his tone. That made it worse. I'm not asking for luxury, I whispered. I'm asking for a roof, for the dignity of not having my things dumped on a curb because I can't scrape together rent in 2 weeks. He looked at me for a long moment. Something like conflict flickered in his eyes, then hardened again into resolve. I can't help you, he said. The company is under pressure. We're dealing with debt you don't understand. Every dollar has to be accounted for. I stared at him. So the answer is no. The answer is you need to take responsibility for yourself, he replied. Dad didn't leave you the company. He left you a phone. Maybe instead of blaming everyone else, you should ask yourself why. There it was again. The line he'd thrown at me in Randy's office, sharpened by repetition. What did I do? I asked softly, except give my life to all of you. He shifted uncomfortably. I have a meeting, he said. I'm sorry you're in a tough spot, really, but I can't fix this for you. He leaned in, kissed my cheek out of habit more than affection, and walked away. I watched him approach the elevator, swipe his badge, and step inside. The doors slid shut behind him with a soft hiss, cutting me out of his world as cleanly as a signature at the bottom of a legal document. The walk back to the bus stop felt longer than the ride in. The city shimmered around me, glass, metal, money, while I moved through it like a shadow. By the time I climbed the stairs to my apartment, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. A white paper was taped crookedly to my door. Final notice, eviction pending. Carl's name was scrawled at the bottom, along with a date circled in harsh pen strokes. Less than 2 weeks. I peeled the paper off slowly, my fingers numb, and sank down onto the hallway floor. The carpet out here was somehow dirtier than the one inside my unit. A flickering bulb overhead buzzed in time with my fraying nerves. I took the phone out of my purse and set it on my lap next to the notice. One object represented $42 million and a dead man's faith in me. The other represented the fact that I couldn't currently afford for more weeks of rent. I picked up the phone, thumb tracing the edge of the screen, and whispered into the dim hallway. I don't know if I can hold on until my birthday, Grant. No answer came, of course. just the low hum of the building and the weight of two futures pressing down on me at once. You are not alone. Grant's voice wouldn't shut up. It echoed in my head as I sat on the hallway floor, back against the wall, eviction notice crumpled in one hand, his phone in the other. You are not alone. Easy for a dead man with million-dollar secrets to say. A little harder to believe when your lower back is pressed into stained carpet and your landlord's handwriting is screaming dates at you in red ink. Still, the phrase wouldn't leave. It floated up through the panic, stubborn and steady, like a buoy refusing to sink. I dragged myself up, joints protesting, and went inside the apartment. I locked the door, not because I was afraid of anyone coming in, but because I needed one barrier between me and the world while I tried to breathe. I sat on the edge of the mattress, phone on my lap, and forced myself to think like the woman I used to be. The one who could take a building apart on paper and find its weak points. If Grant said I wasn't alone, that meant there was someone he trusted, someone I hadn't found yet. I opened the home screen again. The same 3 icons stared up at me. For Marion, calendar, voice recorder, I'd already picked those bones clean. Then I noticed the small gray icon in the corner, one I'd ignored because it looked so ordinary. Contacts. For most people, it was just where phone numbers lived. For Grant, it might as well have been a vault list. My heart thudded. I tapped it. There was only one entry. A name I didn't recognize at first glance, Sam Walker. Underneath it, a number with a California area code. I stared at it for a solid minute. This could be nothing, I told myself. A lawyer, a consultant, one more man who had eaten expensive steak dinners on my husband's tab and sent emails filled with attachments. Or it could be the one in particular Grant had mentioned in his recording. The person who would be there when I needed him most. Did almost getting evicted qualify as most? I didn't have any other candidates. My thumb hovered over the call icon. A lifetime of not bothering people, of not asking for help, of handling things quietly in the background, rose up like a wall. Then I pictured Carl's final notice. The blank space where the rent money should be. The look on Travis's face when he told me to go clean houses. I pressed call. The phone rang twice. Samuel Walker, a man's voice answered. Smooth, low, with the kind of composure that comes from expensive education and long days in conference rooms. Hello, I said, suddenly aware of how small my own voice sounded. This is Marion Whitfield. Silence for half a beat. Then his tone changed, softened at the edges. Mrs. Whitfield, he said, it's good to finally hear your voice. Finally. My stomach flipped. Have we met? Not in person, he said, but I was Grant's personal attorney for 23 years, and his friend when he let himself have one. I've heard about you for a very long time. I didn't know what to do with that, so I latched onto the part that made the least emotional mess. He left your number on his phone. I know, Sam said. He told me he would. He also told me you call when you absolutely had to and not a second before. There was a small smile in his voice. He seems to have known you pretty well. I huffed out something that might have been a laugh if I hadn't been so tired. I don't know what counts as absolutely had to in his mind, but my landlord is about 2 weeks away from putting my things on the sidewalk, so it felt close enough. Then he was right, Sam replied. He told me to expect your call around the moment life backed her into a corner. His words. The idea that Grant had anticipated this exact scene made my head swim. Mrs. Whitfield, Sam continued gently, have you opened the folder labeled for Marion? Yes, I said. The deeds, the properties, the bank statements, I saw all of it. I don't know how to touch any of it. It's like looking at someone else's x-ray. Then let me confirm, formally, what Grant couldn't say in a recording, he said. Every document in that folder is valid. Every property is real. Every account exists. For years now, you have been the legal owner of a significant portfolio of assets. My grip on the phone tightened. How significant? He didn't hesitate. Real estate holdings currently valued at approximately $42 million. That's a conservative estimate based on last quarter's appraisals. 42 million. The number had lived as a vague shape in my mind, an approximation. Hearing someone say it out loud, like a fact, made my knees go weak. I slid off the mattress and ended up sitting on the floor before I realized I was moving. Okay, I said faintly. That's a lot. It is, he agreed. And that's only the physical properties. Those buildings have been generating rental income for years. After expenses, taxes, and reinvestment, there is currently just over $6.3 million in liquid cash sitting in an account in your name. 6.3 million. The room tilted. I put my free hand on the floor to steady myself. I was almost evicted, I whispered. I have been splitting my medication in half and eating toast for dinner, while $6.3 million sits somewhere with my name on it. I know, Sam said, and to his credit, he sounded genuinely pained. I argued with him about that part, more than once. About what part? The secrecy, he said. He hired me to move the assets, to structure the trusts, to build the legal firewalls. But he also instructed me not to contact you directly until you reached out or until your 70th birthday, whichever came first. I let that sink in. Grant orchestrating an entire parallel empire, then insisting I stumble through my own little purgatory before getting the key. Why? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Why would he let me live like this when he could have picked up a pen and fixed it? Sam didn't rush his answer. Because he believed, he said slowly, that if you knew about the money too soon, you would give it away. I went quiet. If he'd called you into his office 5 years ago and said, Mari, here is a portfolio worth 42 million, with 6 sitting in cash, all in your name, what would you have done? Sam asked. I didn't have to imagine. I knew. I would have paid off the kids' mortgages, I said, cleared their credit lines, set up trust funds for the grandkids, thrown a net over every bad decision they'd made and called it love. Exactly, Sam said gently. Grant was a complicated man, but he was very clear about one thing: this money is not a reward for them. It's a corrective for you, a chance for you to live a life that isn't just patching the holes in everyone else. Anger and heartbreak twisted together in my chest. So he let me hit rock bottom, I said, on purpose. Yes, Sam replied quietly, because he knew you. He knew if you had anything left, you'd hand it over with both hands to keep them comfortable. He wanted you to feel in your bones that no one was coming to save you, not so you'd despair, but so that when you finally stood up, you'd do it for yourself. I thought of Travis in that lobby, telling me to get a job cleaning houses, of Brooke treating me like a logistical inconvenience, of Logan's text asking for space. I thought of myself on the mattress, counting out bread slices like they were currency, selling my own dignity at a discount in my head. It's a sick way of showing love, I said. It is, Sam agreed. But I believe he did love you, enough to trust that you could survive the fall, enough to give you more power than he ever had himself. Silence settled between us for a moment. The fridge hummed. Someone in another apartment coughed. What am I supposed to do right now? I asked finally, the desperation bleeding through. I can't walk into a bank with a screenshot and say, "Hello, I'm secretly rich, please take my word for it." My landlord has given me a deadline, not a grace period. That's why he gave you my number, Sam said. The accounts are not just in your name on paper. I am the co-signing attorney of record on the structures holding them. I have full authorization to move funds on your behalf when it complies with the conditions he set. My pulse picked up. Which are? Most of the large transfers are locked behind your 70th birthday, he said. There are corporate triggers, trust conversions, things that need time to ripen. But he also told me, very specifically, that if you called before then and you were in immediate danger, his words, I was to access one of the liquid accounts and make sure you were not homeless or hungry. Something inside me cracked again. This time, not from breaking, but from pressure releasing. You can do that, I whispered. Yes, Sam said. I can't unlock the full structure, not yet, but I can move a small portion. $10,000 wired directly to your personal bank account. Today. $10,000. The number sounded fictional, like something that belonged on a game show, not in my life. You're sure it's mine? I asked. Not borrowed, not an advance, not something I have to pay interest on. Every cent I move will be from accounts in your name, he said firmly. This isn't charity. It's not a loan. It's your money. He just left me in charge of getting small doses to you until the dam officially breaks. I closed my eyes. My legs, already on the floor, felt like they could give out further, like they needed to sink through the boards and anchor themselves in concrete just to handle this. I was going to be thrown out, I said, the truth landing with its own weight. I was trying to decide if I could sleep in the bus station for a while if I had to, and all this time. 6.3 million has been sitting there, Sam finished quietly. I know how that sounds. I won't try to justify the suffering you went through. I can only say that he believed it would change you in a way comfort never could. A laugh burst out of me then, sharp and humorless. It did, I said. Congratulations to both of you. I'm officially changed. Sam didn't flinch. Good, he said softly. You're going to need that steel. We went through the practical steps. I gave him my small bank's routing and account number, hands shaking as I read them off an old statement. I'll process the transfer as soon as we hang up, he said. It may take a few hours to show up, but it will be there by midnight. In the meantime, I want you to eat something more substantial than toast if you can manage it. Bossy, I muttered. Grant liked to surround himself with people who would argue with him, Sam replied. I assume you can handle one more. When we ended the call, I sat there on the floor for a long moment, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone like it might say something else. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I let myself hope. That night, sometime after 11, my phone buzzed with a notification. Not Grant, mine. I fumbled for it on the crate next to the bed and tapped the screen. Alert, deposit received $10,000. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. Then I tapped through to my account. There it was, a balance that didn't make me wince, enough to pay rent for months, enough to buy food that didn't come from the clearance rack, enough to exhale without feeling guilty for using up air. The sob hit me before I could brace for it. Not the quiet, controlled tears I'd let slip in Grant's office chair. This was raw, messy, torn from somewhere deep. I pressed the heel of my hand to my mouth and cried into the dark, not from despair this time, but from bone-deep relief. No one could hear me over the hum of the fridge and the distant sirens. For once, I was glad. This moment belonged to me. By morning, my eyes were swollen, but my spine felt different, straighter. I dressed carefully, not because I had anything good to wear, but because dignity is sometimes just clean clothes and brushed hair. I took an envelope from the back of the drawer, counted out $2,000 in cash, numbers I had not touched in one place in my entire life, and slid it inside. Walking into Carl Jenkins's office felt like walking onto a small, shabby stage. The building that housed the management company was the opposite of Travis's glass tower. Low ceilings, fluorescent lights that buzzed angrily, chairs with stuffing poking out of the seams. Carl sat behind a chipped desk, flipping through a stack of papers. He looked up when I walked in, his default expression already set to irritation. Rent's not due till next week, he said. If you're here to negotiate another extension, don't bother, I told you. I set the envelope on his desk. It landed with a soft, solid thump. What's this? He asked, suspicion immediately cutting through his boredom. Back rent, I said, and next month, $2,000 total. He blinked. Then, like every landlord who's ever lived, he abandoned pride for curiosity and opened the envelope. His eyebrows shot up. He thumbed through the bills once, then again, as if expecting them to vanish on a second pass. You rob a bank? He asked, half joking, half serious. If I did, I'm hardly going to confess it to my landlord, I said dryly. He snorted despite himself. Fair enough. He sat back, the edge in his posture softening. "Well then," he said, "looks like you're caught up. I'll note it in the system, cancel the eviction file. You're square for the next month." The words, "cancel the eviction," settled over me like a blanket. "Thank you," I said, turning to go. "Hey," he called after me. If things change and you can't keep this up, you let me know early, all right? I've seen enough people dragged out by sheriffs. It's not pretty." There was something almost human in his tone. I nodded. "I'll be fine." For the first time, it wasn't a lie. On the way back, I stopped at the grocery store. Not the cheap one that smelled like damp cardboard and sadness. The slightly nicer one 2 extra blocks away, where the produce didn't already look tired. I bought vegetables that still snapped when you bent them. Real bread, the kind that came from a bakery section instead of a plastic bag. Chicken, rice that didn't come from the bottom shelf. Olive oil that wasn't the smallest bottle on sale. I hesitated in front of the cheese case, then picked something that didn't come individually wrapped. It felt like an act of rebellion. At the register, I didn't flinch when the total came up. I handed over my card and didn't stare at the screen while it processed. Approved. Back in the apartment, I cooked. Not just reheated, cooked. The pan hissed when the chicken hit the oil. Garlic scented the air instead of stale dust. I chopped vegetables and sautéed them, added rice, watched everything come together in a real meal, not a collection of "this will keep me alive one more day." When I sat down to eat, the food tasted like more than the sum of its ingredients. It tasted like control. Later that week, I bought a few pieces of clothing that fit. Nothing extravagant. A simple pair of slacks that didn't sag at the waist. A soft sweater in a color that made my eyes look less tired. Underwear that wasn't stretched to its last thread. Small things, quiet upgrades. The apartment was still the same size. The walls still needed paint. The fridge still made that awful choking noise every few hours. But the woman moving through the space was different. I had money, not all of it yet, not the tidal wave Grant had promised on my 70th birthday, but enough to breathe, enough to choose. For the first time in decades, I felt a spark in my chest that didn't come from panic or obligation. It was something older, something I'd almost forgotten, the feeling of having options. I stood at the window that night, looking down at the alley. The dumpster was still there, the graffiti still peeled, but the reflection in the glass had shifted. I wasn't just a broke old woman in a bad building anymore. I was a woman with buildings of her own. They just didn't know it yet. The changes in my life started small enough that no one but me would have noticed them. I bought better bread. That was the first thing, not the cheapest, not the kind that went from fresh to stale in a day. Real bread with a crust that cracked when you tore it and a smell that reminded me of normal Sunday mornings, not survival mode Tuesdays. Then I bought fruit that wasn't bruised into apology, a bag of decent coffee, chicken that didn't come in a frozen block. It was astonishing how much less the world hurt when your stomach wasn't gnawing at itself. Sleep came a little easier. Not perfect, never deep, but better than those first weeks when I lay awake counting the cracks in the ceiling and the days until my landlord would knock. My dreams stopped being just scenes of doors slamming and voices saying, "We can't help you." I bought clothes too, quietly. A pair of black slacks that actually fit. A simple blue blouse that didn't cling in the wrong places. A soft cardigan that felt like kindness. Nothing flashy, nothing that would make anyone stop and stare, but when I caught my reflection in the streaked bathroom mirror, I didn't flinch as hard. I kept listening to Grant. The recording was 43 minutes long. I must have heard it 100 times. I knew where his voice tightened, where it went soft, where he hesitated like he could see my face in his mind and was bracing for my reaction. Some nights I played it just to remind myself I wasn't insane. That the buildings, the bank accounts, the bizarre double life weren't hallucinations brought on by grief and hunger. Samuel Walker called every few weeks. "Just checking in, Mrs. Whitfield," he'd say. "San Diego's occupancy is holding at 98%. Portland's got a waiting list. Vegas picked up a new long-term tenant. Cash flow is strong." He spoke like a man discussing weather patterns. Calm, factual, unfazed by phrases like multi-million-dollar asset performance attached to my name. How much is mine now? I asked once, half afraid of the answer. In liquid form, just under 6.5, he said. The properties themselves are increasing in value with the market. I'll send you quarterly summaries if you like, but I won't move any large amounts without your consent and without the triggers your husband established. My husband, I said dryly, had a talent for the dramatic. Sam chuckled softly. He did, but he also had a talent for being right about people, including you. I wasn't sure how I felt about that part. Out on the street, nothing about me announced any of this. I was still an older woman in a cheap building, still riding the bus, still navigating grocery aisles with a list in my head. But inside, something had shifted in my posture. I caught myself walking a little straighter, holding my shoulders back. I stopped avoiding eye contact automatically. When someone behind me in line huffed impatiently, I didn't shrivel. I simply stepped aside, unbothered. They saw a woman stretching the last good years of her body in a tired part of town. They had no idea that I owned more square footage in this country than most of them would ever set foot on. I didn't flaunt it. I also didn't forget it. With the immediate panic of eviction gone, I tried to do the thing I'd always told myself I valued most. Reconnect with my children, no strings attached. No money, no negotiation, just conversation. I called Brooke first. She picked up on the third ring, voice brisk and distracted. Hey, Mom, can we make this quick? I'm in between meetings. I could hear something in the background. Voices, the muted echo of a large room, the click of heels on polished floors. Of course, I said. I just wanted to hear your voice, see how you're doing. I'm fine, she said. Busy, the house is a mess right now. The mansion. I pictured work crews tearing into the walls I'd painted, the floors I'd polished. Don't call it that, she snapped lightly. It sounds tacky. We're rebranding it. The designer says if we open up the main floor and rethink the entryway, we can add serious value. Vanessa thinks we can position it as transitional modern with legacy features. The right buyer will pay a fortune. The right buyer, I repeated. You're selling. Eventually, she said. Once we've optimized, it's an asset, Mom. You don't just sit on something like that. You make it work for you. I almost laughed. If she knew how many assets in my name were quietly working for me, she'd choke. How are you? I asked. Really? I told you I'm fine, she replied, impatience creeping in. Honestly, it's been crazy. The company's stuff, the lawyers, the banks sniffing around. I've had to take a much more active role than I expected. There it was again. The company, the empire, always the center of their orbit. Do you ever feel... I started, then stopped. I wanted to ask if she missed me. If she thought about the night I left that house with my life in boxes. If she replayed anything the way I did. Feel what? She said, already checking out of the conversation. Nothing, I lied. I'm glad you're busy. Busy is good. Yeah, she said. Look, I really have to go. Vanessa just got here. We're picking tile. Of course, I said. Love you. Love you too, she answered automatically, and hung up before it had the chance to mean anything. Logan didn't answer at all. Texts went unread. Calls went to voicemail. His social media, yes, I looked, was full of beaches and boats and pictures of him grinning beside people whose names I didn't know, drinks in their hands, captions about living your best life. If he was struggling with anything, he'd learned well from his father how to hide it behind a good view. Travis stayed silent. No returned calls, no emails, no texts. The only proof of his existence came indirectly. A headline about a stalled project with Whitfield Urban Development in the fine print. A mention from Brooke about Travis being impossible about the banks. A few lines from Sam, who, when I pressed, only said, "He's under enormous strain. The corporate audit did not go well." How not well? I asked. Enough that I'm surprised you haven't been called in yet, he replied. But that's not my side of the fence. The call from Randy Cole came a week later. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, his voice as smooth and careful as always. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." I looked around at my apartment, the chipped counter, the humming fridge, the folded stack of newly washed clothes on a chair. "No," I said. "What can I do for you, Mr. Cole?" "I was hoping you could come into my office," he said. "There are developments regarding Grant's estate and the company. It's important that you be present for this conversation." My heart kicked once hard. Developments. Had someone traced something? Had a bank followed a paper trail from the company to the properties? Had some sharp auditor found my name where it wasn't supposed to be and started asking questions? "Is this about the will?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "In a manner of speaking," he said. "It's about the company's financial position. But given your place as Grant's widow and the mother of the majority shareholders, your presence is appropriate." Appropriate, a nice step up from afterthought. "I'll be there," I said. The bus ride to Randy's office felt different than the ride to Travis's. I wasn't going there as a supplicant this time. I was walking into a building where everyone still thought I had nothing. The glass facade of the tower reflected the city back at itself. Inside, the lobby was all polished stone and quiet lighting. I knew the route by heart. Security desk, elevator to 22, down the short hallway lined with framed certificates and photographs of Randy shaking hands with people in suits. His assistant gave me the same professional smile she'd offered the first time. "Mrs. Whitfield, good afternoon. They're waiting for you." They. The conference room looked the same. Long, polished table, floor-to-ceiling windows, leather chairs that seemed designed to make people forget they had spines of their own. Travis sat nearest Randy, jaw tight, tie loosened like he'd already been arguing. Brooke sat beside him, makeup perfect but eyes shadowed, a stack of papers clutched in her hand. Logan occupied a chair slightly away from them, tapping his foot, a crease between his brows I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. "Mom," Travis said, standing halfway as I walked in, then sitting back down when he realized I didn't need help. "Thank you for coming, Marion," Randy said politely. "Please have a seat." I took a chair near the middle of the table. Not at the head, not shunted to the far end like last time. Somewhere in the center where I could see all their faces. Randy folded his hands on the table. "I'll get straight to the point," he said. "Following Grant's passing, a comprehensive audit of Whitfield urban development was initiated. Standard procedure, given the size and complexity of the holdings." Brooke let out a humorless laugh. "Standard," she muttered. "What the audit uncovered," Randy continued, "is that the company's financial position is significantly more precarious than anyone realized." "How precarious?" Travis asked tightly. Randy glanced at a file. "In blunt terms, the so-called $50 million empire your father built is actually carrying close to $40 million in debt, some of it long-term and manageable, a substantial portion of it not." The room went very quiet. Travis shook his head. "That doesn't make sense," he said. "Dad hated debt. He used to brag about being lean and liquid. We've got assets, projects, land." "You have assets," Randy agreed, "but many of them are heavily leveraged. Several key projects were funded through high-risk loans with aggressive terms. There are penalty clauses tied to missed deadlines, market downturns, and cash flow disruptions. The audit found repeated instances where funds were shifted from one project to prop up another." "Like a shell game," Logan said under his breath. Randy didn't disagree. "Your father was optimistic," he said carefully. "He took on large projects assuming future revenue would cover present obligations. For a while it worked. But with the recent market shifts and some underperforming developments, the structure is strained." Brooke's face had gone pale. "What about the house?" she asked. "The primary residence, it's in my name. You said that was separate." "It is," Randy said. "However, the line of credit taken out against it is tied to a corporate guarantee. If the company defaults, the bank has the right to call certain notes." Her hand tightened around the papers she held. "So I could lose it," she whispered. After everything I've put into it. Logan ran a hand through his hair. What about the cars? He asked. Some of those were on the company books, right? Some were, Randy confirmed. And some were used as collateral for short-term bridge loans. The ones that were sold without clearing the liens may complicate matters. Logan swallowed. I didn't know, he said quickly. Nobody told me they were tied up. I just thought they were cars Dad wasn't using anymore. Travis slammed his palm lightly against the table. So Dad was running a house of cards, he snapped. And we inherited the deck without knowing half of it was already marked. Your father was trying to keep the company competitive, Randy said. But yes, the current reality is that Whitfield urban development is significantly overextended. If all debts and obligations were called today, you'd be looking at insolvency. Insolvency, Brooke repeated, like the word itself offended her. Bankruptcy, Logan translated. Randy nodded once. Chapter 11, reorganization, is one option we'll have to discuss seriously. Their panic swelled around me like a storm cloud. The banks can't just take everything, Brooke said. We have rights. You do, Randy agreed. But creditors have rights as well. They'd form committees. There would be negotiations, restructurings. It would be complex. Travis turned his stare on me suddenly, as if remembering I was in the room. You didn't know about this, he demanded. You were with him. You lived in that house. Did he ever tell you anything about these loans? No, I said honestly. He didn't share the details of his deals with me. Randy cleared his throat. That actually brings me to another point, he said. As part of the audit, we had to review the will and all personal bequests. Mrs. Whitfield, aside from the phone your husband left you, did he ever mention any assets in your own name? My pulse steadied instead of spiking. This was it, the test. I felt for that new steel in my spine and wrapped my hands around it. No, I said calmly. The phone was it. Travis narrowed his eyes. You got it open though, right? You said you did. Yes, I replied, after a while. What was on it? Brooke pressed. Emails, contacts, documents, anything about the company. For a split second, images flashed through my mind. PDF after PDF, my name on line after line, numbers that made the ones on these balance sheets look like rounding errors. Also, voicemails. Messages from holidays we'd half ruined with work calls. Photos of the kids when they were small, of us in front of half-built houses, of sunsets from hotel balconies, taken in rare quiet moments. The 43-minute confession from a man who had built an empire out of steel and debt, and a secret one out of my name. I folded my hands on the table, mirroring Randy's posture. There were photos, I said. Family pictures, old messages, a few voicemails I hadn't heard. That's it, Travis asked skeptically. Sentimental things, I said. Nothing a bank would be interested in. Technically, it wasn't a lie. The banks would be interested in the deeds, not the device itself. And those were in a folder I had no intention of introducing into this conversation. Randy studied me for a moment. I could almost see him weighing probabilities. Grant didn't leave you any separate investment accounts, he asked. No trusts, no side portfolios. Not that I know of. I answered, letting a small, sad smile touch my mouth. If he did, he hid them well. He had, right in front of everyone. Logan leaned back in his chair, exhaling hard. So we're on our own, he said. We always were, Travis muttered. He just didn't bother to tell us how close to the edge we were standing. Brooke's eyes glistened. I thought, she stopped, swallowing. I thought we were stepping into something solid, stable, not this. My sympathy stirred, but it didn't overwhelm me the way it once would have. There was a time when, at the first sign of their distress, I would have rushed to soothe, to fix, to sacrifice something of myself to make their path smoother. Now I sat and watched my grown children confront consequences that weren't of their making, but were very much part of their inheritance. Given the current debt load and the projected cash flows, Randy said carefully, continuing as if nothing is wrong is not an option. We can pursue aggressive restructuring, but realistically, Chapter 11 would allow the company to reorganize under court supervision and potentially emerge leaner. Potentially, Travis echoed bitterly. Or we become a case study in how not to run a family business. It's one path, Randy said. I realize it's not what any of you wanted to hear. Horror sat differently on each of their faces. On Travis, it looked like anger thinly masking fear. On Brooke, like disbelief that her carefully curated life might actually crack. On Logan, like confusion, like a man waking up from a very long party to discover the bill had been sent to his table. I felt strangely detached. Not indifferent. They were still my children. Their pain still tugged at something old and tender in me. But below that, deeper, was a calm I didn't recognize from my earlier life. I was not sitting at this table waiting to see whether I would have a place to live next month. I was not silently tallying up what I could sell, who I could ask, which version of myself I'd have to cut away to make them more comfortable. I had my own ledger now, my own column, my own assets. For once, my survival was not tied to their competence. Randy began outlining next steps, consultations with bankruptcy specialists, meetings with creditors, press strategies if the situation became public. The words washed over me like static. This was their storm now. When the meeting adjourned, chairs scraped back, papers shuffled, voices rose in hurried, overlapping conversations. Brooke, we're not selling the house, Travis was saying through gritted teeth. We might not have a choice, she shot back. Logan just stood there, looking like he'd been shoved to the edge of a cliff he hadn't realized he was standing on. Mom, he said weakly as I passed, did you ever think it would end up like this? I thought of Grant's recording, of the 4 Marion folder, of San Diego, Portland, Vegas, and beyond, of my landlord's face when I dropped that envelope on his desk. No, I said quietly, but things rarely end up the way we think when we refuse to look closely. He frowned, not quite understanding, and I left him to figure it out in his own time. I thanked Randy for the meeting, shook his hand, and walked out of that office with my head high. In the elevator, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. Same face, same lines, same silver threads in my hair. Different woman. By the time I stepped back out onto the street, the air felt clearer. The city noise seemed less like an assault and more like proof that life went on, with or without any one man's empire. I walked to the bus stop feeling oddly lighter, almost relieved. I had sat at that long, polished table, listened to the collapse of the world they'd built around Grant's name, and I had not collapsed with it. I had held my husband's secret. I had held my own. And for the first time, I understood that I was no longer the dependent in this story. Time didn't pass so much as rearrange itself around me after the meeting in Randy Cole's office. The kids hurled themselves into damage control. I didn't need to ask to know. Rumors travel faster than press releases. Half the city's business pages started hinting at restructuring and strategic reviews at Whitfield Urban Development. I heard the word bankruptcy on the news one night, attached to my last name, and changed the channel before the anchor could finish the sentence. For the first time in my adult life, I chose not to interfere. They had lawyers, they had advisors, they had each other. They did not have me as a silent cushion anymore, rearranging my own life to soften their falls. Instead, I turned my attention to someone I had ignored for decades, me. It started in the kitchen. I bought food that wasn't just fuel, vegetables with color, fish that flaked under a fork instead of bouncing, yogurt that didn't taste like regret. I cooked for myself as if I were a guest I cared about impressing. I developed small rituals, morning coffee in a mug I actually liked, not whatever was clean. 10 minutes of stretching so my joints didn't sound like bubble wrap every time I moved. A walk around the block after dinner, then 2 blocks, then 3, circling the same cracked sidewalks and tired storefronts, letting my body remember what it felt like to move without rushing. Sometimes, when the light hit a particular corner just right, I found myself mentally redesigning it. If that awning extended, if that doorway widened, If that upper floor got a balcony, this could be beautiful. Architecture slipped back into my thoughts like an old song I'd forgotten the lyrics to, but still knew the tune of. The properties Sam told me about stopped being abstract numbers and turned into places in my mind. I pictured the San Diego building's elevators, the Portland complex's courtyard, the Vegas warehouse's loading docks. I imagined tenants checking their mail, unloading trucks, going about their lives in spaces that existed because my name was on paper somewhere. And while I made soup and walked, and occasionally scribbled little floor plan ideas on the back of junk mail, time advanced toward a date that glowed in my mind like a warning light. October 18, my 70th birthday. The closer it crept, the more that one word from the calendar app echoed in my head. Wait. 3 days before the date, my phone rang with a California number. "Mrs. Whitfield," Sam said when I answered. "How are you?" "Old," I said, apparently almost officially. He chuckled. "You sound sharper than most 40-year-olds I know. I'm calling because it's time." My pulse picked up. "Time for what?" "On the morning of your birthday," he said. "I need you to come to my office at 9 a.m. Your children will be there. So will Randy Cole. Per your husband's instructions, that's when everything will be revealed." The phrase landed like a weight. "Everything," I repeated. "As much of it as can fit into one very intense meeting," he said. "There are letters, documents, structures that legally activate on that day, and there is something your husband wanted you to read before anyone else hears a word of it." A shiver ran up my spine. "You sound almost nervous." "I am," he admitted. "I've spent years setting up dominoes your husband designed. On your birthday, we start flicking them. I've been ready on paper for a long time. Emotionally, I suspect we'll all be improvising." After we hung up, my apartment stopped feeling like a place to live and started feeling like a waiting room. Sleep abandoned me. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the fridge and the pipes and the occasional argument drifting through the window. When I did drift off, I dreamed of numbers chasing me down long hallways, of buildings collapsing into neat stacks of legal documents, of Grant sitting across from me at the table, saying, "Do you trust me?" and me not being able to answer. During the days, I cleaned. Not that there was much to clean. One room, one bathroom, one tiny kitchen. But I scrubbed the sink until it stopped feeling rough under my fingertips. I wiped down baseboards no one had looked at in years. I organized my drawer so the cheap forks and knives all faced the same way. It wasn't about the apartment. It was about control, about making something, anything, obey me. In between bouts of pointless scrubbing, I pulled out the printed copies of the property documents Sam had mailed and reread them. San Diego, Portland, Vegas, Chicago, line after line confirming what my heart still sometimes struggled to believe. I wasn't living in this cramped space because I had nothing. I was here because a stubborn dead man had insisted I learn how to exist without depending on anyone else. I listened to the 43-minute recording again, then again, as if some new sentence would appear this time and explain the parts he'd left vague. "You're going to have more power than you ever wanted. Don't give it away." The night before my birthday, I slept in short, anxious stretches. When the alarm went off at 6, it felt like I'd barely closed my eyes. I got up anyway. The water in the shower sputtered between too hot and too cold, as always. I stood under it, letting both temperatures hit my skin, thinking about how many times I'd showered in a bathroom 3 times this size and felt more trapped than I did now. I dried my hair carefully, took extra time with my face, not to erase the years but to honor them. The lines didn't vanish, but they looked less like damage and more like a record. Then I put on the suit. Dark green, simple, clean lines. I'd bought it weeks earlier with this exact morning in mind, tucking it into the back of the closet like armor waiting for a battle. When I buttoned the jacket, something settled into place inside me. In the streaked bathroom mirror, I saw a 70-year-old woman. I also saw the 25-year-old who used to sketch elevations on diner napkins, The 40-year-old who could run a household like a small corporation. The 60-year-old who sat through board dinners and listened to men talk numbers she had indirectly made possible. For the first time, all those versions of me looked like they belonged to the same person. The building that housed Sam's office was older than Randy's sleek glass tower. Brick facade, worn stone steps, brass door handles polished by 1,000 hands. Inside, the floors creaked. The lobby smelled faintly of paper and lemon polish, not new carpet and anxiety. It felt human. Sam's office was on the 4th floor. The door had his name on a simple plaque, nothing flashy. When I stepped inside, I saw bookshelves lining the walls, full of law texts and binders, but also a few framed photographs and a plant that looked like it had survived 3 legal cycles at least. "Happy birthday, Mrs. Whitfield," Sam said, standing up from behind his desk. He wasn't in a power suit today, just a well-cut jacket and an expression that hovered between lawyer and friend. "Thank you," I said. "You look," he paused, searching for the right word, "prepared." "I feel like I'm walking into the 3rd act of a movie I didn't know I was in," I replied. "That's not an inaccurate description," he said dryly. "Before the others arrive, there's something I'm supposed to give you." He opened a drawer and took out an envelope. It was thick, sealed, and unmistakably familiar. I knew that handwriting. I'd seen it on love notes tucked under my coffee cup, on permission slips, on the first lease we ever signed. "To Marion. For your 70th birthday." My throat tightened. "I'll leave you alone," Sam said softly. "Take your time. Knock when you're ready, or I'll check on you in a few minutes." When he closed the door behind him, the room seemed to shrink and expand at the same time. I sat in the chair by the window, turned the envelope over in my hands once, then slid my thumb under the flap. The paper gave way with a soft tear. Inside was a stack of pages covered in Grant's uneven, hurried script, ink blots where his pen had pressed too hard, margin notes where he doubled back to add something he couldn't leave unsaid. I took a breath and started reading. "Mari, if you're holding this, it means you made it. You survived the part I hate the most. I wish there had been another way. I spent years trying to find one. I tried to figure out how to get you to this exact moment without putting you through hell first. I failed at that like I failed at a lot of things outside of steel and concrete." He never did know how to ease into anything. "By the time you read this, you'll have heard the recording on the phone. You'll know about San Diego, Portland, Vegas. You'll know about the rental income and the accounts. You'll know that I knowingly let you go through humiliation, hunger, and loneliness while those assets sat in your name untouched. I'm not going to pretend that was anything but brutal. It was. I designed it that way. Not because you deserved it. You didn't. Because the version of you who existed before this needed to break." He didn't soften the word. The woman who sat quietly at the end of conference tables, who let herself be talked over, who apologized for taking up space in her own home. That woman would have given away every dollar I left her the second one of the kids cried hard enough. You would have layered your own sacrifices on top of my mistakes and called it motherhood. I couldn't let that happen. He took responsibility in the next lines with a bluntness that hurt. "I turned our kids into monsters. Not in the movie sense. No fangs, no cloaks. Just the everyday, socially acceptable kind of monsters who think money is oxygen and everything else is negotiable. I rewarded ambition and punished vulnerability. I praised them when they closed deals and brushed past them when they came to me with anything messier than a spreadsheet. I let them see you doing the invisible work and never made them understand its value. They watched me worship growth, and they learned to measure their worth in square footage and revenue streams. They learned to see you as a fixture, not a person. That's on me. I can't fix what I did to them. I can only stop the next generation of damage by refusing to fund it." My eyes blurred. I kept going. "By now, you know about the properties, roughly $42 million worth, give or take market fluctuations. You know about the $6 million and change sitting in cash, growing while you were learning how to live on almost nothing. Here's the part you don't know yet. That's not all of it. Because of course it was. Years ago, when everyone was obsessed with tech and startups and the future, I quietly formed a Delaware holding company. Boring shell on the outside, very real on the inside. I started moving pieces into it, stakes in projects we backed, positions in funds, a couple of early bets on companies everyone else thought were dumb ideas, a few that failed, a few that did better than anyone expected. That shell company is in your name, 100%, no shared ownership, no family trust language for the kids to twist later. As of the last valuation before I died, that entity is worth around $68 million. You read that right. 42 in property. 6 and some in cash. 68 in the Delaware, ghost no one bothered to look for, because they all assumed I'd never put anything in your name without telling them. Call it roughly $116 million, give or take. All yours. The numbers sat on the page, absurd and heavy and terrifying. This is the part where you start thinking about all the people you could save with it. The kids, the grandkids, every charity that ever sent you a letter. Stop. This money is not a weapon for you to use against yourself. It's not a leash for the kids to pull. It's not your punishment or your apology. It is your exit package from the version of your life where you only existed in relation to other people. What you do with it is up to you, completely. If you decide to bail the kids out, that's your choice. I won't be there to stop you, and no one can legally force you. If you walk into their meeting today and say, absolutely not, that's your choice too. I structured it so no court, no creditor, no tearful adult child can touch a cent unless you open that door. You could fund scholarships. You could build homes. You could travel. You could sit in a tiny apartment and order takeout every night if that's what makes you happy. What you cannot do, as far as I'm concerned, is pretend you don't deserve any of it. Before you were my wife, you were a hell of an architect. You saw lines I didn't see. You thought in space and light and possibility. You turned rooms into stories. And then you shelved that woman because I needed someone to keep my train from derailing while I barreled ahead pretending I was invincible. I am asking you, begging you to find her again. Open your own office if you want. Mentor kids who never thought they'd get into design school. Build something that has your name on the door, not mine. The money is there to give you the freedom to choose, not to shackle you to a new version of obligation. He was never good at flowery prose, but the next lines were as close as he ever came. You were always more than the roles you took on, more than Mrs. Whitfield, more than Mom. I saw that spark in you when we were broke and scared, and eating canned soup at the dining table you designed on a scrap of paper. I buried that spark under projects and meetings, and my own ego. That's on me. This, what you're holding now, what you're about to walk into, is my last attempt to dig it back out. I believe in you more than I ever believed in a building, and you know how seriously I took my buildings. You don't owe me forgiveness for the way I went about this. You don't owe the kids rescue. You owe yourself a life. Take it. I love you. Grant. By the time I reached his name, my vision was useless. Tears blurred the ink until some of the letters ran together, little dark rivers on the page. But it wasn't the sharp, panicked crying of the eviction notice, or the hot, angry tears of the will reading. This was something else. Release. 45 years of swallowed words, unasked questions, delayed dreams, and maybe someday, loosening their grip. I sat there, the letter trembling in my hands, and let it all come. The anger, the gratitude, the grief, the bitter amusement at the idea of my life being costed out on a sheet of paper like one of his projects. He had broken me. He had also handed me the blueprints to rebuild. A soft knock came at the door. Mrs. Whitfield, Sam's voice careful on the other side. They've arrived. Take your time, but when you're ready, we'll go in. I folded the letter along its creases, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it gently in my bag. Then I stood up. My knees protested, but they held. My reflection in the window showed a woman in a dark green suit, eyes a little red, shoulders straight. I opened the door. Sam took one look at my face and didn't try to offer comfort or talk me out of whatever I was feeling. He just nodded once. "Are you ready?" he asked. I thought of the girl with ink on her fingers and building designs in her head. The wife who sat at the edge of countless meetings. The mother who walked out of a mansion with a dead phone and a box of clothes. The woman who now knew she was worth $116 million, and more importantly, worth more than what anyone else thought of her. "Yes," I said, my voice was steady. "I'm ready." We turned toward the conference room. Walking into that conference room felt like stepping onto a witness stand. They were all already there. Travis sat closest to the head of the table, shoulders tight inside a dark suit that looked more wrinkled than usual, as if he'd stopped caring about the details. Brooke was to his right, in an expensive dress that tried too hard to say in control, her phone face down beside a leather folder. Logan sat farther down, rumpled, eyes ringed with sleeplessness. Randy Cole occupied his usual seat, expression carefully neutral, hands folded on a thick file in front of him. 4 sets of eyes turned toward me when I stepped in. For a heartbeat, no one said anything. I wondered what they saw. I wasn't the woman in a faded cardigan who'd been pushed to the edge of this table at the will reading. I wasn't the stunned widow clutching a safe key like a lifeline. The dark green suit fit me cleanly. My shoulders were back. My hands were steady at my sides. I took my seat beside Sam, who had deliberately placed a chair for me at the center of the table, not at the end. The symbolism didn't feel accidental. "Thank you all for coming," Sam began, his voice calm and even. "As you know, your father left a number of specific instructions regarding how and when certain parts of his estate could be discussed. Today, on Mrs. Whitfield's 70th birthday, is the date he selected for full disclosure." Travis leaned forward, impatience cracking through his polished tone. "Can we cut to the point?" he snapped. "We've been dealing with banks, creditors, and lawyers for months. If there's more money he hid somewhere that can keep this company afloat, we need to know now." Sam didn't flinch. "There is more money," he said. Brooke exhaled sharply, a sound of half relief, half desperation. Logan's head came up. "But," Sam continued, "it is essential that you understand. The additional assets I am about to describe are not part of Whitfield Urban Development's estate. They are completely separate, and they are not yours." The tiny flicker of hope in the room went out so fast it might as well have never been there. "What is that supposed to mean?" Travis demanded. Sam opened a large leather folder and began laying out documents on the table with slow precision. "We're going to go through this in order," he said. "I'll start with the simplest layer and work up." He slid a stack of property records toward the center of the table. Deeds, titles, schedules of assets, my name printed neatly at the top of each page. "Over a period of approximately 15 years, Sam said, Grant quietly acquired a series of real estate holdings in multiple states. Some were purchased in cash, others through modest, fully serviced loans that have since been paid. All of them were placed in the name of one person." He nodded toward me. "Marion L. Whitfield." Brooke reached for the nearest document, flipping through the pages with quick, jerky motions. "These could be anything," she said. "Drafts, proposals." He had shell companies all over the place. "In this case," Sam replied, "these are recorded, fully executed deeds. You can check the county registries yourself. Commercial building in San Diego appraised last quarter at just under $11 million. Apartment complex in Portland, 12.3. Distribution warehouse near Las Vegas, 8.7. There are more. They total, as of the latest appraisals, roughly $42 million in real estate." The room went very still. "In her name?" Logan asked quietly. "Not the company." "Correct," Sam said. "These assets were never on Whitfield Urban Development's books. They are private holdings. Your father was meticulous about keeping them separate." "That's impossible," Travis said flatly. "He would have told me. I was in the meetings. I signed off on acquisitions. He wouldn't just build an entire portfolio behind our backs and put it in. He didn't finish the sentence, but his eyes flicked to me as if the very idea offended him. He did, Sam said simply. I know because I structured the deals. At his insistence, every one of these properties is unencumbered by the company's current debt obligations. Brooke had gone pale. She stared down at the papers in front of her, lips moving soundlessly as she scanned line after line. All this time, she whispered. All this time we were juggling loans and extensions and he had this. He didn't have it, Sam corrected gently. She did, legally, for years. Denial, then shock, then anger flickered across their faces in rapid succession. Travis pointed at the documents. So while we're sitting with creditors, getting lectured by banks, and trying to keep the company's head above water, you're telling us our mother has been secretly, playing land baron? I met his gaze steadily. I wasn't playing anything, I said. I didn't know the full extent of it until after he died. That's not the point, he snapped. The point is those assets could solve everything. The house, the loans, the projects. We could leverage them, restructure. No, Sam said, his tone still calm but edged with steel now. You can't. These properties are not collateral for the company's mess. They are not part of the estate you inherited. They belong solely to Marion. Your father set it up that way for a reason. Randy cleared his throat quietly. If I may, he interjected, I have reviewed the documents. They are legitimate, and they are, as Mr. Walker says, entirely separate from the corporate holdings. Dad wasn't well at the end, Brooke said suddenly, grabbing for a lifeline. He was working too much, not sleeping. He could have been confused. This might not hold up if we... Sam reached for another folder and placed it on the table. He anticipated that argument, he said. In the last 6 months of his life, your father underwent 3 separate psychiatric evaluations conducted by 2 independent doctors. All confirm that he was of sound mind, fully aware of his decisions, and under no undue influence. He slid the reports across the table. Signatures, letterhead, clinical language spelling out what he just said. Legally, Sam continued, there is no basis to argue that he was incompetent when he established these structures. Brooke's mascara had started to smear, faint dark shadows forming beneath her eyes. She stared down at the reports like they were written in a language she no longer understood. Travis pushed back his chair and stood up, palms flat on the table. So that's it, he said, voice rising. He hides assets, dumps the debt-ridden carcass of the company on us and hands her. He gestured vaguely in my direction, words failing him. All this. That, Sam said quietly, is not all. You could have heard a pin drop. He opened one last folder. This one was slimmer, but the papers inside were heavier stock, the kind used for things that mattered. Roughly 8 years ago, Sam said, your father formed a Delaware holding company. On paper, it appeared to be a generic shell. In practice, it became the vehicle for a series of investments, stakes in private tech firms, positions in international funds, participation in several early-stage ventures. He tapped the top page. Every unit, every share, every beneficial interest in that entity is registered to one owner, Marion L. Whitfield. How much? Logan asked. His voice sounded numb. Sam didn't sugarcoat it. As of the last valuation prior to Grant's passing, the holdings inside that structure were worth approximately $68 million. Something in Logan's face just let go. He sagged back into his chair like someone had cut the strings holding him up. Brooke's hand flew to her mouth. She flipped through the pages with shaking fingers, mascara now smudged in earnest as her eyes raced over valuations, signatures, transfer records. Travis went scarlet. That's not fair, he exploded. We've been tearing ourselves apart trying to keep everything from collapsing, and she's been sitting on over $100 million. I haven't been sitting on anything, I said, my voice low but even. I've been eating once a day and wondering how to pay rent while your father's games played out. Sam raised a hand. Be precise, he said. The parallel real estate holdings currently total around $42 million. Liquid accounts, including the income from those properties, add just over 6. The Delaware Corporation adds approximately 68. You're looking at a personal net worth for Marion of roughly $116 million. Brooke shook her head. No, she whispered. He wouldn't do that, not to us, not after everything we put into. After everything you put into what? Sam asked quietly. Into the company he over-leveraged, into the lifestyle built on lines of credit you never bothered to read, into treating your mother like an inconvenient obligation once the will didn't break the way you expected. Her eyes flashed. You don't know anything about our family. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I know enough, he said. I've sat in rooms with your father for decades. I listened to him justify missing birthdays and recitals. I watched him sign documents that benefited all of you and documents that quietly protected her. And I have, over the last year, watched how you responded when you believed she had nothing. The silence that followed that statement was heavy. Travis opened his mouth, then closed it again. Logan stared at the table. Brooke looked anywhere but at me. Your father chose, Sam went on, to separate your futures. He left you the company and its debts. He left Marion an entirely different structure, debt-free. He did this knowing it would force all of you to reveal who you really are when there was nothing left to gain. Randy shifted in his seat, discomfort flickering across his face. From a legal standpoint, he said, clearing his throat, Mr. Walker is correct. I have reviewed the instruments. They are airtight. The properties, the accounts, the holding company, none of them can be attached to Whitfield Urban's obligations without Marion's explicit consent. Creditors have no claim. So she could save us, Brooke said hoarsely, finally looking at me, and just whoa. Sam didn't answer for me. He simply laid his hand flat on the final page in front of him, as if to close the file. What she chooses to do is her decision, he said. That was the one thing Grant was absolutely insistent on. This money is not a tool for control. Not from him, not from you. It is hers. Completely, legally and morally. He turned his head toward me then, the only person at the table whose life had just expanded instead of contracted. For the avoidance of doubt, he said, his tone formal again. As of this morning, Marion L. Whitfield's personal net worth stands at approximately $116 million. She holds these assets free and clear of any corporate liability or third-party claim. He let the words hang there, solid and undeniable. In this room, he finished, she is, by every measure that ever mattered to Grant, the richest person here. For a few seconds after Sam finished speaking, no one moved. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the air conditioning and the soft tick of the clock on the wall. Then the realization landed. I saw it hit each of them, one by one. On Travis, it looked like fury trying to hold itself together. His jaw tightened, his hands balled into fists on the table, eyes bright with something that was not just anger, but fear. On Brooke, it was pure panic. Her face crumpled, mascara already smeared from earlier now beginning to run in earnest, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to argue with the air. On Logan, it was collapse. His shoulders rounded, his gaze dropping to the table, as if he'd just realized the test had been happening all along and he'd failed it without knowing it was graded. You're the richest person in the room, Brooke repeated slowly, like she couldn't quite process the sentence. You have $116 million and she gestured around helplessly. Here. Drowning, Logan supplied quietly. Travis dragged a hand down his face. Okay, he said, voice tight. Fine, he set it up this way. He gave you everything and handed us a sinking ship, but you can fix this. His eyes locked onto mine, and I felt the old instinct rise up. The one that wanted to apologize for things that weren't my fault, to offer comfort, to make it easier. I didn't let it speak. All you have to do, he went on, is move some of those assets, refinance, backstop a few loans, we restructure, we reorganize, we keep the company alive, we protect the family name. You won't even feel it. It's numbers on a page to you. Numbers on a page, like my eviction notice had been. Brooke leaned forward, tears spilling over. Mom, please, she said. If we had known, we would have treated you differently. There it was, the sentence I'd been waiting for without knowing it. I almost laughed. Instead, I let the truth come out clean. I know, I said. They blinked, thrown off by the agreement. You would have treated me differently, I continued, because you thought I had money, not because I was your mother. Brooke flinched. If I'd walked into that will reading with this number attached to my name, I said, you would have pulled out chairs for me. You would have listened when I spoke. You would have asked what I needed instead of asking when I planned to move out. I held her gaze. You would have loved my balance sheet, not me. That's not fair, she whispered. Isn't it? I asked. Let's test it. When I had nothing, when you believed I had nothing, how did you treat me? I pushed my chair back and stood. The room seemed to tilt slightly, but my legs held. I walked slowly around the table, not packing, not looming, just moving, letting my words sink in. At the will reading, I said, stopping behind Travis's chair, you laughed, all three of you. Your father left you the company, the house, the cars. He left me a phone, and you thought that was the punchline to a joke. I was in shock, Travis muttered. So was I replied. You disguised yours with arrogance. I disguised mine with silence. Only one of us kept paying for it afterward. I moved toward Brooke. She stared straight ahead, jaw tight. You supervised my move like a project, I said. You stood in that foyer with your clipboard, assigning rooms and deciding what I was allowed to take, as if I were a tenant overstaying my lease instead of the woman who chose the tiles you were so eager to rip out later. You watched my life being packed into boxes and never once asked where I was going. I assumed Travis, she started. You assumed someone else would handle me, I cut in. The way you used to assume someone else would handle the laundry, the groceries, the birthdays. I stepped closer to Logan. He couldn't quite meet my eyes. You texted me once, I said softly. I need some space, Mom. I paused. I had 30 days to move out, nowhere to go, a dead phone and an empty bank account. I was already in all the space the world could offer. What you needed was distance from my reality. He swallowed hard. I'm sorry, he said, voice rough. I was selfish. I was scared and stupid, and I am sorry. It was the first apology I'd heard from any of them that sounded like it had cost something to say. I know, I said quietly. I believe you. I moved back toward the head of the table, turned so I could see all three of them. My children, my failures, my history. At once. You left me alone, I said, not dramatically, just stating a fact. You knew I didn't have a job. You knew I'd been out of the workforce for decades. You knew your father had controlled the finances. And yet, when the money transfers got inconvenient, you stopped. We had debt, Travis burst out. We were under pressure. You don't understand the numbers we were dealing with. I understand numbers, I said. I understand that you chose your comfort over my survival. You heard Mom is struggling and treated it like an unfortunate footnote, not an emergency. Randy shifted in his seat, eyes fixed on the table as if he could will himself invisible. Sam sat very still, a quiet presence at the far end, watching, not intervening. I went hungry, I said. I cut my pills in half to make them last. I sat on the floor of a hallway with an eviction notice in my hand and your father's phone in the other, wondering which would destroy me first. Brooke made a small, strangled sound. Logan's eyes were wet now. You didn't know about the money back then, I continued. Fine, I'll give you that, but you knew about me, you knew I existed. I let a beat of silence hang between us. It wasn't enough. Travis's anger seemed to break on something more fragile. His voice dropped. Mom, he said, listen, I was wrong, we were wrong. If you help us now, if you just give us a chance, we can rebuild this. We can make it right. Everything Dad built, everything we've worked for, it doesn't have to die, please. That's not how this works, I said quietly. What you're asking for isn't a chance to learn. It's a reset button. You want me to erase the consequences and let you keep playing the same game. We'll change, Brooke insisted, tears spilling freely now. I swear if we had known we would have. Would have what? I asked. Called more, invited me to more dinners. kept me in the big house where it was easier to ignore me. She flinched again. You love results, I said. So look at them. This is who you were when you thought I was useless. This is who you are now that you know I'm not. I took a breath, feeling the decision settle into place inside me like a stone that finally found the bottom. I have enough money to rescue all of you, I said. I could pay off the debt, buy back the house, put the company on life support, and still have more than I will ever personally need. Hope flared in their eyes again, a reflex they couldn't suppress. And I won't, I finished. The silence that followed that sentence was thicker than any I'd ever felt in my life. Out of spite, Travis demanded, voice cracking. Out of revenge. No, I said. If this were about revenge, I would have never called Sam. I would have let you walk into this meeting and find out there was no extra money at all, that everything he built died with him. I glanced at Sam. His eyes met mine, steady, backing me without a word. I'm not doing this to hurt you, I said, turning back to my children. I'm doing this because your father was right about one thing. Money without values is a curse. You have never had to build anything that wasn't underwritten by him. You stepped into a world already paved for you and treated it like a birthright. Logan let out a shaky breath. We thought we were earning it, he said. I know, I replied. But you were, not really, not the way he did, and not the way you'll have to now. Randy cleared his throat. From a purely practical perspective, he said hesitantly, even with Marion's assistance, there's no guarantee the company could be salvaged in its current form. We're talking about extreme measures either way. That was his lawyer way of saying, she's not the villain of your story. I laid a hand on the back of an empty chair, grounding myself. I'm keeping what he left me, I said. Not because I enjoy watching you struggle, but because for the first time in my life, I have the power to choose myself. I am not throwing that away to patch holes in a ship you helped drill into. Brooke covered her face with her hands and sobbed. Not the dramatic, camera-ready sob of a socialite having a bad day, but the raw sound of someone whose world no longer made sense. Logan stared at me, eyes red. Is there anything, he asked, anything we can say that would change your mind? No, I said gently, not today. Their faces crumpled in different ways. Travis's hardened, Brooke's broke, Logan's simply emptied out. I could have stopped there, walked out, left them with the wreckage and the knowledge that I had walked away clean. But love, even exhausted and misshapen, doesn't die that neatly. If there comes a time, I said slowly, when you are no longer looking for a bailout, when you have done your own work, built something with your own hands and your own values, when you come to me as my children and not as petitioners at a bank window. They looked up, hopeful and afraid. Then we can talk, I finished. Not about money, about us, about whether there is anything left to rebuild between us as people, not as branches of an estate. Brooke sniffed, nodding frantically. Logan scrubbed at his eyes. Travis looked away, jaw tight. I hope, I said quietly, for your sake that day comes, I truly do, but I won't buy your way there. That path is yours to walk. No one tried to stop me when I moved toward the door. Behind me, I heard a chair scrape harshly against the floor, a muffled curse from Travis, Brooke sobbing, Logan saying something I couldn't quite make out. Randy's low, shaky exhale, papers rustling, the beginning of a world caving in on itself. In front of me, the hallway stretched out, lit by soft, ordinary lights. It looked like any other corridor in any other office building. To me, it felt like the entrance to a new life. Sam fell into step beside me a few moments later, closing the conference room door gently behind him. He didn't say, I'm sorry, or that was harsh, or any of the things people say when they're uncomfortable with someone else's choices. He just walked with me, hands in his pockets, expression thoughtful. He'd be proud of you, Sam said finally. For this, for all of it. I believed him. For the first time in a very long time, I believed in myself too. When the conference room door clicked shut behind us, the noise on the other side became a dull, distant murmur. It sounded like a storm I no longer lived in. Sam and I stood in the hallway for a moment, neither of us in a hurry to speak. The carpet was some forgettable commercial pattern, the wall an inoffensive beige, but the air felt different, like the pressure in my chest had finally equalized. "Are you all right?" he asked eventually. Not the way people ask when they want you to say yes to make things easier, but carefully, as if he'd accept the real answer. I checked in with myself. I was tired, wrung out. My heart hurt in a way that had nothing to do with arteries and everything to do with three faces behind that door. But beneath all of that was something strange and unfamiliar. Steadiness. "I will be," I said. He nodded, as if that was exactly what he'd expected. "You did what he asked you to do," Sam said. Maybe not the way he imagined it, but in spirit. "I didn't do it for him," I replied. "Not entirely." "I know." He gave me a small, wry smile. "That's why it worked." We started walking toward the elevator. My heels clicked softly against the floor. With each step away from the conference room, I felt something loosen that had been knotted inside me for years. I thought of Grant's letter. "You owe yourself a life. Take it." For the first time, I had the unnerving sense that he wasn't looming over my shoulder anymore, steering outcomes from beyond the grave. Instead, it felt like he'd finally stepped back, like a hand lifting from the small of my back after guiding me through a crowded room. "I keep expecting him to appear around the corner," I admitted, "to argue with me, to tell me I misinterpreted the plan." "If he did," Sam said dryly, "I'd bill him double." I laughed. It startled both of us. "At the elevator." He pressed the button, then glanced at me. "What are you going to do now?" he asked. "With all of it?" 3 months ago, that question would have sent me into a panic. Now, the answer rose in my chest like it had just been waiting for the right moment. "Live," I said, "and build something with my own name on the door." The elevator arrived with a soft chime. We stepped in, the doors slid shut, and the floor numbers lit up one by one as we descended. Outside, the air felt cooler, clearer. The city moved around us, indifferent to everything that had just shifted in that room upstairs. Cars passed, someone laughed across the street, a bus hissed to a stop. Life went on. This time, I would too. 3 months later, I stood on a different sidewalk, in front of a different building, looking up at my name. Not as Mrs. Grant Whitfield. Just as me. WHIFILDDSIGNS. The letters were simple, brushed metal against dark stone, clean and modern without screaming for attention. They didn't lean on his first name or his company's legacy. They sat there quietly, stating a fact. I existed. I created. This was mine. The building itself sat in the heart of the city, a few blocks from the courthouse, a few more from the financial district. I'd bought it partly because the numbers made sense and partly because, when I walked through it the first time, I could see exactly what it wanted to be. The ground floor had been a forgettable office with drop ceilings and tired carpet. We tore those out. Now, sunlight poured through tall windows onto polished concrete floors. White walls waited like blank pages. The smell of fresh paint still lingered under the faint scent of coffee from the small machine by the entrance. Exposed beams crossed the ceiling, not because they were trendy, but because they were honest. I stepped inside, letting the door close behind me. That little click still made something warm bloom in my chest. I had a key to my own studio. At 70, it felt slightly ridiculous and completely right. 3 desks sat in the open space, each cluttered in a way that made me quietly happy. Rolls of trace paper, laptops, half-finished models, coffee cups, sketchbooks bursting with ideas. "Morning, Mari." Olivia looked up from her second screen, her short curls pulled into a messy pile on top of her head, pencil tucked behind her ear. 28, brilliant, and incapable of pretending to be impressed by anyone's reputation for more than 5 minutes. "Hey, boss," said Amir, not looking up as he adjusted something on a 3D rendering. He was 30, all sharp eyes and quiet competence, his designs precise without being sterile. "Good morning, Mrs. W. I mean, Mari," corrected Lena, blushing as she caught herself. 24, fresh out of grad school, with a portfolio full of big, ambitious ideas and an eagerness that made me remember what it felt like to be at the start of a career instead of the supposed end. I told them all on day one not to call me Mrs. Whitfield, unless we were talking to a client who needed the formality. Doing it here, inside these walls, felt like dragging the old hierarchy into a space that was trying to be something else. "Good morning," I said. "What did I miss?" "City emailed back about the Bryant renovation," Olivia said, spinning her chair toward me. "We got preliminary approval on the facade changes. And I've almost finished the revisions on the community center," Amir added. "The structural engineer thinks we can open up that courtyard more than we thought. You were right about the load paths." The tiny, ridiculous thrill that went through me at that sentence made me want to laugh at myself. You were right about the load paths. No one had told me that in years. "Lena," I asked. She grinned, pushing her hair out of her face. "I've been playing with the lighting plan for the 5th-floor lofts," she said. "I tried that thing you suggested with indirect strips along the beams. It makes the ceiling feel higher without adding fixtures." I walked over to her screen. The layout glowed softly. Beams, lines of light, shadows falling exactly where we wanted them. "Good," I said, pointing. "Watch this corner, though. You don't want to create a cave here. Pull the strip 3 feet further, soften the drop-off. Light should guide you through a space, not punish you for walking into it." She nodded, already adjusting. It was absurd how much joy there was in that small correction, in explaining why instead of just issuing orders, in seeing their eyes light up, not because my name was on their paycheck, but because the idea made sense. I spent my mornings with them, redlining drawings, asking annoying questions, pushing them to think about how a lobby would smell at 6 in the evening, how a stairwell would sound on a rainy day, how a child would see a space differently than an adult. In the afternoons, I visited sites. Construction dust on my shoes, hard hat mussing my hair, the satisfying thud of boots on plywood. I watched walls rise where there had only been lines on paper. I stood with clients and translated my team's drawings into plain language. "This will feel smaller on the plan than it will in real life, I promise. And you'll thank us for that window in December." I made decisions, real ones, not about hors d'oeuvres or table settings or which charity event we'd attend. About materials, budgets, circulation paths, where people would stand to have their lives changed by a piece of news they didn't see coming. For the first time since I was young enough to pull all-nighters without consequence, my brain ached in that satisfying way that meant I had actually used it. Sam stopped by once every couple of weeks, under the pretense of dropping off documents. He always left with at least one coffee stain on his tie from our habit of talking with our hands. He gave me updates I didn't ask for but didn't shut down either. "Travis took a job at a mid-size real estate firm," he told me one afternoon, leaning against the edge of my drafting table. "He's doing regular transactions now, starter homes, small commercial spaces. He has a boss." I imagined my oldest son being told what to do by someone who wasn't obligated by blood to tolerate his moods. "How's he handling that?" I asked. "Badly," Sam said, "but he's learning slowly." I nodded, feeling something soften but not break. "Good." "Brooke sold the house," he said another time. "The mansion," I corrected automatically, then caught myself. "Her house, where is she now?" "Nice apartment," he said. "Still upscale, but not obscene. Smaller footprint, fewer rooms to decorate. She's doing some consulting work on interiors for a local firm. Apparently she has an eye for it when she isn't trying to impress anyone." I pictured her in a kitchen. She could actually clean by herself if she had to. In a living room where she knew where every light switch was because she'd used them all. "And Logan?" I asked, the first time his name didn't feel like a bruise. "Went back to school," Sam said, smiling a little. "He re-enrolled to finish that degree he abandoned when the money started flowing too easily. He's taking night classes, working part-time during the day." "You sound almost proud of them," I said. "I'm invested," he replied, "in outcomes." They hadn't called. No surprise visits. No long, tearful messages on my voicemail. No dramatic gestures with flowers or apologies rehearsed in mirrors. There were days when the absence stung. When I would see a woman my age having lunch with her adult daughter and feel something sharp twist inside. When I caught a whiff of a cologne on the street that reminded me of one they used to wear and had to take a breath before it passed. But those moments came less often than they once would have. Their growth, I reminded myself, was their work, not mine. I had my own projects. The day the sign went up, WHITFIELD in solid metal above glass doors, I stood on the far sidewalk and just looked at it. Cars went by. A cyclist rang a bell. A bus sighed at the curb. No one else cared that a new name had appeared on a building that had existed for decades. I did. Whitfield. It had been his name first. The one he stamped onto companies and deals and projects until it became shorthand for a certain kind of empire. Now it sat beside a word he'd never let me use publicly about myself. Designs. Not support, not behind the scenes, not holding it all together so someone else could take the credit. Designs. Looks good, Olivia said, coming to stand beside me, hands shoved into her jacket pockets. It's a little crooked, Amir observed, squinting. It's perfectly straight, Lena argued. The angle from here just makes it look off. I smiled. It's fine, I said. Everything doesn't have to be perfect to be right. We stood there for another minute, the four of us, watching the afternoon light catch on the metal letters. Then I turned toward the entrance, pushed the door open, and walked back inside, where plans were waiting, clients were calling, and 3 young architects were looking to me, not as someone's widow, not as someone's mother, but as the person who signed their drawings and believed in their ideas. For the first time in my life, I was comfortable in a role that had nothing to do with who I belonged to and everything to do with what I made. I wasn't just Marion, Mari Whitfield, wife of Grant, mother of Travis, Brooke, and Logan. I was the woman behind Whitfield Designs. And I was, finally, a creator again. I used to think my life ended the day they laughed at me in that conference room. The widow with the useless phone. The mother with nothing. Now, when I looked back, it felt less like an ending and more like a demolition. Painful, noisy, brutal, necessary. If I had to put it into one sentence, it was this. The greater the humiliation, the greater the preparation. Being thrown out of the mansion had felt like being stripped in public. Every box carried past me had taken another piece of the woman I thought I was. The wife of a powerful man, the mother of important children, the quiet presence at the edge of a world built in someone else's name. Going hungry had burned away my illusions about what people really saw when they looked at me. Not our beloved mom, not the woman who raised us, not a partner who held this together. Just a cost center, an inconvenience, a problem to be managed until it faded into the background. Being ignored showed me the exact size of the space I occupied in their lives when I had no leverage at all. It was smaller than I'd ever let myself admit. Unlocking the phone didn't fix any of that. If anything, it made the contrast harsher. One moment, I was a nearly evicted 70-year-old in a bad apartment. The next, I was an invisible millionaire staring at proof that my life had been bigger and more valuable than anyone, including me, had treated it. Disappearing into that folder labeled, for Marion, was the first time I'd really looked at myself. Not in a mirror, but in ink and signatures and legal language that all said the same shocking thing. You mattered enough for someone to build a secret empire around you. Discovering that empire was terrifying. Confronting my children with the knowledge of it was worse. There was no satisfaction in watching their faces fall when they realized I had what they wanted and wouldn't hand it over. There was only a strange, aching relief in finally saying, with my choices instead of just my words, I am not your safety net. I am not your soft landing. I am my own person. Opening the studio felt like the quiet opposite of all that noise. There were no dramatic speeches, no gasps, no lawyers. Just keys in my hand, the smell of paint, the scratch of my pen revising a line on a drawing, the hum of young voices bouncing ideas off each other. It took me 70 years to find that woman, the one who walked into Whitfield Designs and felt like she was walking into her own skin instead of someone else's shadow. 70 years. It would have been easy to call that a tragedy. All that time spent orbiting someone else's gravity. All those chances I'd had to step forward and chosen instead to step back. But late was still not never. Some people never woke up at all. On the corner of my desk, next to a stack of plans and a chipped mug full of pens, sat Grant's phone. I had charged it exactly twice since that night it lit up at midnight and pulled his voice out of the dark. It still worked. If I turned it on, there might be calendar alerts, old emails, maybe even some bit of code he'd tucked away to trigger one last surprise. I didn't need them. The phone wasn't a puzzle anymore. It wasn't a key. It was an artifact, a relic from the life that had broken me open. Sometimes, when the office was quiet and the others had gone home, I would reach out and rest my fingers lightly on it. In those moments, I talked to him in my head. You were a stubborn, impossible man, I would tell him. You gambled with too many things you had no right to risk. You hurt me more than you will ever know. Thank you. Thank you for seeing pieces of me I didn't fight hard enough to claim. For carving out something with my name on it when I had forgotten I had one outside of yours. For forcing me, in the most infuriating way possible, to stand up and decide who I wanted to be when there was no one left to perform for. I don't forgive the method, I would admit, but I am grateful for the result. Sometimes, in the quiet, I almost felt him there, not looming, not directing, just watching. Not the king of the empire, but the young man who once sat in a cramped apartment with me, eating canned soup at a wobbly table I'd designed, believing we were going to do something with our lives. You were right about one thing, I would think at him. I was always more than a supporting character in your story. I just took too long to fire the director. Then I'd pull my hand back, leave the phone where it was, and turn to the window. From my office, I could see the city stretch out in layers. Daylight turned it into a grid. Streets and alleys, rooftops and railings, people moving in patterns they didn't realize they were tracing. At night, it softened, became a scatter of lights and motion, quiet pockets and bright chaos. Somewhere out there, my children were living their much smaller, much harder lives. Travis showing houses he didn't own. Brooke turning other people's rooms into homes. Logan sitting in classrooms with students young enough to be his juniors, taking notes like the world hadn't already written him off. Whether they ever came back to me or not was no longer the axis my life spun around. That love was there, stubborn and enduring, but it had finally moved from center stage to its proper place. A part of me, not the whole of me. Out there, people were making mistakes, starting over, losing things they thought they couldn't live without and discovering they could. Buildings went up, came down, were reborn as something else. I understood that cycle better than most. I was no longer just a wife, though I had been one for most of my life. No longer just a mother, though that role had shaped me in ways I would carry to my last breath. No longer a victim of someone else's secrets and my own silence. I was Marion Mari Whitfield. Architect. Owner of Whitfield Designs. Woman with a future. For the first time, that future felt less like whatever was left over, after everyone else took what they wanted, and more like a blank sheet of paper waiting for my own lines. The city glowed outside my window, restless and alive. Somewhere beneath those lights, new stories were starting. Some would end in triumph, some in ruin, most in something untidy in between. My story wasn't neatly wrapped. There were still fractures and loose ends, people missing from my life, regrets that no amount of money could sand down. But as I stood there, hand resting lightly on the back of my chair, I realized I wasn't afraid of the unwritten parts anymore. I had survived humiliation, hunger, loneliness, and truth. What was left was possibility. I turned back to my desk, to the sketches and emails and schedules and half-finished ideas, and felt something simple and solid settle in my chest. I was finally ready to live the life I chose. Not the one that had been chosen for me,